I found this in Dad's old box. Dad, look, Annie said, stepping inside. There's stuff inside this box. She stood at the doorway of Nathaniel Whitmore's bedroom, holding a small wooden box with both hands, her fingers leaving faint streaks in the dust that coated its surface. Nathaniel didn't turn around. He was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with practiced precision, his phone buzzing in his hand every few seconds. I'm busy, Annie, he said, eyes still on his reflection. Put it down somewhere. I'll check it later. But there's something inside, she insisted, walking closer. I can hear it later, he repeated, a little firmer this time. Annie stopped a few steps behind him. She looked down at the box, then back up at her father's back, then down again without another word. She lifted the box slightly and gave it a small shake. Something inside shifted. A soft Nathaniel didn't turn yet, but his hand stopped moving on the tie. Annie shook it again, a little harder this time. The sound came again, something sliding gently against wood. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Annie, he said, warning in his voice. She didn't stop. She gave the box another shake, this time watching him instead of the box. Nathaniel turned. What are you doing? He asked, not angry, but no longer distracted. Annie held the box out slightly. There's something inside, she said again, quieter now. Don't you want to see? Nathaniel frowned. For a brief moment, he just looked at the object in her hands. The box was old, that much was obvious. The wood had faded unevenly, darker along the edges, lighter where time had worn it smooth. The brass latch was dull, almost green at the corners. Dust clung to the lid, thick enough to mark where Annie's fingers had brushed across it. Where did you get that? He asked. Annie said, under your bed. My ball rolled under there. And I saw it pushed all the way in the back. She tilted her head like you didn't want anyone to find it. Nathaniel shook his head slightly. I don't remember that box. And he blinked. You don't? No. He searched his memory quickly, the way he did when trying to recall a name at a meeting or a detail in a contract. But there was nothing, no image, and yet it was. Annie took another step closer. Maybe it's important, she said. Nathaniel almost smiled. That's usually not how important things are stored. Maybe you forgot. I don't forget things like that. Annie looked down at the box again. Then she gave it another shake. This time, Nathaniel watched closely. The sound came again, soft, contained. Something small moving inside. Nathaniel's curiosity tightened slightly. What's in it? He asked. Annie's eyes lifted to meet his. She hesitated. Just long enough. I don't know. You said you saw something. I only opened it a little. She admitted, his expression sharpened. You opened it. Just a little, she said quickly. I didn't take anything. Nathaniel studied her face. What did you see? He asked. Annie shifted her weight from one foot to the other, still holding the box. A picture, she said slowly. And something shiny, she paused. And I think a letter. Nathaniel felt something stir in his chest, faint, distant, like a memory trying to surface through water, but it slipped away before he could catch it. A picture of what? He asked. Annie shrugged. I don't know. I didn't look long. Then she looked at him again. More directly this time. I wanted you to see it. Nathaniel glanced at the clock on the wall. 8 minutes. His phone buzzed again on the dresser. He ignored it. Annie. He said softer now, but still holding on to control. I really do need to get to work. Just leave it here. I'll look at it after. Annie didn't move. Instead, she walked to the bed and sat down, placing the box carefully on her lap. Then, very deliberately, she lifted the lid. The hinge gave a quiet creak. Nathaniel's eyes flicked it despite himself. Annie looked inside for a second. Then, she closed it again. She looked back at him. Just look for a little bit, she said. Please. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He sighed, running a hand briefly over his face. What did you say was in there? He asked again. Annie brightened slightly, a picture and something shiny. She leaned forward a little. It looked like a bracelet. Then after a pause and there was a lady. Nathaniel's chest tightened just slightly. A lady. Annie nodded. She looked nice. She hesitated. I think she looked like me. Nathaniel crossed the room. He stopped in front of the bed. Annie looked up at him, waiting. Can I see? He asked. She smiled a little and pushed the box toward him. Open it, she said. I want you to see it yourself. Nathaniel sat down beside her. For a moment, he just looked at the box. It felt like something he should know, something that belonged to him in a way deeper than ownership. And yet, his mind gave him nothing back, no memory, no explanation. He reached for the latch. A faint scent rose up old wood paper. Something softer beneath it, something almost familiar. Nathaniel's hand still. Annie leaned closer. That's it, she whispered. That's what I saw. Inside the box lay a photograph, a folded letter, and a small piece of cloth wrapped around something that caught the light. Nathaniel stared. The room seemed to narrow around that box. Everything else fading. His phone, the meeting, the house, the morning. Just the box, just the things inside it. Annie nudged his arm gently. Well, she said. Nathaniel didn't answer. Nathaniel kept the box open between them, but for several seconds, he did not touch anything inside it. Annie sat beside him on the edge of the bed, her legs tucked under her, watching her father's face more than she watched the box. She had expected him to be curious, maybe surprised, maybe a little annoyed, because she had interrupted his work. She had not expected him to look as if someone had opened a door inside his chest and let the cold in. Daddy, she said softly, are you going to take the things out? Nathaniel heard her, but he did not answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the photograph lying on top. It was old, the edges slightly yellowed, the surface dull from years in darkness. He reached for it with 2 fingers, careful at first, then stopped when his hand began to tremble. He picked up the photograph. A younger Nathaniel stood in the picture. Not the polished billionaire with the controlled smile and expensive silence, but a man with loosened shoulders and unguarded eyes. He was standing behind a woman on the porch steps of the old guest house. One hand rested on her shoulder. The woman was laughing, her dark curls falling around her face, her smile bright enough to make the whole photograph feel warm despite the fading paper. In her lap was a baby. Annie leaned in. Is that you? She asked. Nathaniel did not speak. She pointed at the younger man. That looks like you, but different. You look happier. Nathaniel swallowed, but his throat would not obey him. Annie's finger moved to the woman. Who is she? Still, he said nothing. Then Annie pointed to the baby. And who's that little baby? Why are they standing with you? Nathaniel closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, the photograph blurred. He tried to breathe through it, tried to control it, tried to be the man he always was in front of his daughter. But the box had brought back too much too quickly. The porch, the laughter, the afternoon light, Lena's hand covering his, a baby's warm weight against his chest, and the version of himself who had once believed his life could be simple because love had chosen him. Annie touched his sleeve. Daddy. He lowered the photograph onto the bedspread as if his strength had left him. Then he reached into the box again and pulled out the folded letter. He unfolded the letter. The paper made a small dry sound. His eyes found the first line. Nate, please forgive me. The words struck him like a hand against the chest. He had seen them before. He knew that now. He remembered standing in another room years ago with this same letter in his hands, rage burning so hot he could barely see. He had read that one line and stopped. He had decided that forgiveness was proof of guilt. He had decided Lena had betrayed him. He had decided he knew the whole story because pain had offered him a simple version and he had been desperate enough to take it. Now the same words waited in front of him again. Please forgive me. Nathaniel pressed his hand over his mouth. Annie's eyes widened. Daddy. He shook his head once, but it did no good. The tears came before he could stop them. Annie froze. She slid closer, unsure what to do. Daddy, she whispered. Why are you crying? Nathaniel tried to answer, but the sound that came out was not an answer. He held the letter with both hands now, staring at the line as if it had opened a grave he had been walking over for years. Annie looked down at the paper. What does it say? He breathed in sharply, trying to steady himself for her. He wiped his face with one hand, but more tears came. His voice, when it finally came, was rough and strange. It says, he stopped, swallowed, and tried again. It says, Nate, please forgive me. Annie frowned, not understanding the weight of it. Who wrote that? Nathaniel looked at the photograph again. The woman in the picture smiled up from another life. Your mother, he said. Annie became very still for a moment. Even her breathing changed. My mommy wrote that. Yes. She looked at the photograph, then at the letter, then at Nathaniel. Her voice dropped to a careful whisper. That lady is mommy. Nathaniel nodded, but the movement nearly broke him again. Yes, baby. Annie's eyes returned to the picture. She studied the woman more closely now. Not as a stranger in an old photograph, but as the person whose absence had lived in every birthday, every school pickup, every bedtime question Nathaniel had not known how to answer. She looks like me, Annie said. She does. Her hair is like mine. Yes. And the baby. Annie pointed again. Is that me? Nathaniel wiped his cheek with the back of his hand. Yes, he said. That's you. If Annie's discovery touched your heart, please like this video. Tell us in the comments where you were watching from and share what you felt when she saw her mother's bracelet for the first time. And if you believe every child deserves the truth, love, and a family that never gives up, please subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. Annie stared at the photograph, her face softening with wonder. I was with her. Nathaniel's voice broke. Yes, she was holding me. Yes. Annie leaned over the picture as if she might fall into it if she looked hard enough. Was she happy? Nathaniel looked at Lena's face, at the way her smile had been caught mid-laugh. For years, he had remembered only the woman leaving. He had forgotten the woman who stayed up all night with a feverish baby. The woman who sang softly while washing bottles. The woman who once danced barefoot in the kitchen with Annie pressed between them, laughing because Nathaniel had stepped on her foot twice. Yes, he whispered. She was happy with me. That question undid him in a quieter way. He turned toward Annie and cupped her small face in one hand. "With you," he said, "very happy with you." Annie nodded, but confusion still shadowed her eyes. "Then why did she go away?" Nathaniel closed his eyes. He had answered that question badly for years. Not cruelly, never cruelly, but badly. With soft lies and careful evasions, with phrases like "she had to leave" and "grown up things are complicated." He had thought he was protecting Annie now with the photograph on the bed and the letter in his hand. He knew he had been protecting the version of the story that hurt him least. "I don't know all of it yet," he said. "But I think I was wrong about some things about Mommy." He nodded. Annie looked down at the letter. "Did she do something bad?" Nathaniel pressed his lips together. The old answer rose in him automatically, shaped by bitterness and years of silence. But Annie was watching him, and Lena's handwriting was in his hand, and the lie would not come. "I thought she did," he said. "For a long time. I thought she left because she wanted to leave." Annie's face tightened. "She didn't want me." "No," Nathaniel answered too quickly, too urgently, pulling her closer. "No, Annie, listen to me. Don't ever think that, not for 1 second. But if she left, I know," he said, his voice shaking. "I know that's how it feels. How else can it feel?" The question was so simple that it hurt worse than accusation. Nathaniel looked at the letter again. He forced himself to read past the first line this time. No matter what came next, he owed Annie that much. He owed Lena that much. He owed the truth, the courage he had not given it years ago. He continued silently at first, his eyes moving across the page. "There are things I do not know how to say without breaking you. One day, when Annie is old enough, please give her the bracelet. Tell her I bought it before she was born, when I still believed love could protect us from everything. And if you ever loved me truly, do not let our little girl grow up believing her mother left because she was unwanted." Nathaniel lowered the letter. Annie saw the change in him. "What?" she asked. "What?" she asked. He looked at the small cloth bundle still lying in the box and reached for it. His fingers moved more gently now, as though he was afraid of disrespecting what had been waiting there. He unwrapped the cloth. The bracelet slipped into his palm. A tiny heart charm engraved with the letter A. Annie's mouth opened slightly. "That's what I saw," she said. "The shiny thing." Nathaniel held it between them. "She bought this for you," he said. "Mommy did." "Yes. When? When you were very little. Maybe before you were even born." Annie reached out but stopped before touching it, as if asking permission without words. Nathaniel nodded. She touched the heart charm with one fingertip. "It has my letter." "It does. Can I wear it?" He looked at the bracelet. It was too large for her wrist. Lena had known that when she bought it, she had been buying something for the future. For a daughter she believed she would be allowed to watch grow. That thought made his eyes burn again. "It might be too big. I can hold it with my other hand." He gave a broken little laugh through the tears. "All right." He slipped it over her wrist. It slid down toward her hand at once, and Annie caught it before it fell. "It's not ready," she said. "No," Nathaniel whispered. "Maybe not yet, but it's mine." "Yes." She looked at the bracelet with a seriousness that did not belong on a child's face. "Then I'll grow." Nathaniel bent his head. He couldn't help it. Another sob came, quieter than before, but deeper. Annie set her small hand on his knee. "Daddy, don't cry like that," she said, sounding frightened now. "You're scaring me." He pulled himself together with visible effort. He placed the letter carefully beside the photograph and wrapped one arm around her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to scare you. Are you sick?" "No." "Did Mommy make you sad?" Nathaniel looked at the photograph again. The easy answer would have been yes. Lena had made him sad. Her leaving had hollowed out whole rooms inside him, but the truth he was beginning to understand was not so clean. "I think," he said slowly, "I was sad because I thought I knew what happened. And now I'm not sure I did." Annie leaned into him, still holding the bracelet in place with one hand. "What happened?" He looked at the letter. He had not read all of it out loud. He was not sure he should. Not yet, but Annie deserved more than shadows. "Your mother gave me this box a long time ago," he said. "I was hurt and I didn't look at everything the way I should have. You didn't open it." "I opened it, but I didn't really see it." Annie frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "No," he said, "it doesn't. Grown-ups do things that don't make sense when their hearts hurt." She thought about that. Then she asked, "Did you forget the box?" Nathaniel looked at it. "Yes, how do you forget something under your bed?" He almost smiled, but it did not quite reach his face. Sometimes people put things away because they don't want to feel them anymore. After a while, they tell themselves they forgot. But they didn't. "No," he said, "they didn't." Annie looked back at the photograph. She touched baby Annie's face, then Lena's hand, then Nathaniel's younger face. "Why are we standing together?" "Because we were a family." "Were." Nathaniel heard the danger in the word the moment it left him. Annie heard it too. He corrected himself. "We are a family," he said. But back then, your mother was with us. Annie looked at him carefully. Do you still love her? The question came without warning. Nathaniel looked toward the window where the Atlanta morning continued as if nothing in the world had shifted. Cars moved faintly beyond the gate. Somewhere downstairs, Martha opened a cabinet. Life continued with an indecent calm. I don't know how to answer that, he said. Why? Because love can get tangled up with hurt. Annie nodded slowly, though she clearly understood only part of it. Like when I get mad at Mr. Buttons because he falls off the bed, but I still want him. Nathaniel looked at her and despite everything, a small breath of laughter escaped him. A little like that. She seemed satisfied. Then her eyes returned to the letter. Can you read more? Nathaniel looked down. He had read enough to know there was more. Enough to know the story was not what he had told himself. Enough to know that if he kept reading, the life he had built around one wound might begin to collapse. But Annie was beside him. Annie with Lena's bracelet slipping down her wrist and dust still on her fingers from crawling under his bed. Annie, who had not asked for any of this and yet had found the key to it because a yellow rubber ball had rolled into the dark. He picked up the letter again. His voice was low when he spoke. I'll read it, he said. But I may need a minute. Annie leaned against him. I can wait. Nathaniel held the letter in both hands and read the next line silently before choosing what to say aloud. Annie felt him stiffen. Daddy. He did not answer. Annie was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned her head against his arm. Nathaniel looked at his daughter, at the bracelet Lena had bought for a future that had been stolen, at the photograph of a family that had been broken before it had a chance to grow roots, and at the words that pointed towards Savannah like a road opening beneath his feet. Downstairs, Martha called again, gentler this time. Mr. Nathaniel, Miss Annie, everything all right up there? Nathaniel wiped his face, but he did not hide the tears fast enough. Annie saw them. Maybe that was all right. Maybe. Children did not need fathers who never cried. Maybe they needed fathers who cried and still told the truth. He called back, his voice rough but steady enough. Martha, could you come up here, please? Annie looked at him. Are we in trouble? Nathaniel pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. No, baby, he said. I think we're finally going to stop being in trouble. She did not fully understand. But she held on to him anyway. And for the first time since the box opened, Nathaniel did not close it. He left the photograph, the letter, the bracelet, and the hidden note spread across the bed in the morning light, no longer buried, no longer waiting in the dark, while Annie sat beside him wearing the silver bracelet that did not fit yet. Martha came upstairs slowly, the way she always did when she sensed that a room had changed before she entered it. She did not call out again. She simply appeared in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, her apron still tied around her waist and a folded dish towel in her other hand. The smell of pancakes and warm butter followed her in, ordinary and gentle, and somehow that made the sight on the bed feel even more impossible. The wooden box was open. The photograph lay beside Nathaniel's knee. The letter was unfolded in his hand. The silver bracelet hung loose around Annie's wrist, too big for her, sliding every time she moved. And Nathaniel Whitmore, who had once walked into hospital fundraisers, courtrooms, business dinners, and corporate fights without so much as a crease in his expression, had tears on his face. Martha stopped. Oh, she said softly. It was not surprise exactly. It was recognition, as if she had known this day might come, only not when, and not by the hands of a child searching for a lost ball. Nathaniel looked up at her. Do you know this box? Martha's eyes moved from the box to the photograph, then to the bracelet on Annie's wrist. Her face softened at the sight of it. Yes, sir, she said after a moment. I know it. Annie looked between them. You know Mommy's box, too. Martha's lips pressed together. She stepped into the room and came closer, but not too close. Older women in the South often knew how to approach grief the way they approached a sleeping baby, quietly and with respect. I remember it, she said. Your mama brought it here a long time ago. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around the letter. Why didn't you ever tell me? Martha looked at him, and for the first time that morning, there was pain in her eyes that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with what she had carried alone. Because some houses have more locks than doors, Mr. Nathaniel, she said, and not all of them need keys. He stared at her, not understanding yet, but feeling the shape of something worse waiting beyond the answer. Annie touched the bracelet with one finger. Martha, was my mommy nice? The question moved through the room like a small hand opening a curtain. Martha sat on the edge of the chair near the bed, her knees stiff, her expression tender. Yes, baby, she was nice, but nice is too small a word for Lena Carter. Nathaniel looked down at the photograph again. Lena Carter. The name had not been spoken in that room for years. Hearing it now did something to him. It did not reopen the wound. The wound had never closed properly. It only removed the expensive bandage he had kept over it. Annie leaned forward. What was she like? Martha glanced at Nathaniel, asking without asking whether she should answer. Nathaniel nodded once. Martha folded the dish towel in her lap. She had a laugh you could hear from the kitchen, even with the dishwasher running. She liked peach tea with too much ice. She sang when she was nervous. Old church songs mostly, though she pretended she didn't know she was doing it, and she had a way of looking at people that made them stand up a little straighter because she expected them to be better than they were. Nathaniel closed his eyes. That was Lena, not the woman in the rain. Not the woman getting into Daniel's car. Not the final image he had tortured himself with for 5 years. That was the woman before the ending. The woman who had walked into his life when he was still young enough to believe love could make a man brave and foolish enough not to know the difference. He first met Lena Carter at a community fundraiser in Southwest Atlanta in the basement hall of New Hope Baptist Church. Nathaniel had gone because his father told him to. Whitmore Group was trying to improve its public image after buying several blocks near a historically black neighborhood. And Charles believed charitable visibility was cheaper than controversy. Nathaniel, then in his early 30s and still trying to prove he was more than his father's heir, arrived in a dark suit, wrote a generous check, shook hands with ministers, smiled for photographs, and prepared to leave before dessert. Lena stopped him near the folding tables. "You leaving already, Mr. Whitmore?" He remembered turning at the sound of her voice. She stood beside a stack of donated children's books, wearing a green dress and flat shoes, her hair pulled back, her expression calm but unimpressed. There were people in the room who looked at Nathaniel as if he were a solution. Lena looked at him as if he were an unfinished sentence. "I have another engagement," he said. She looked toward the large cardboard check propped near the podium. "I suppose the check can stay even if you don't." He almost smiled. "You don't approve of donations." "I approve of help," she said. "I'm just old-fashioned enough to believe help should come with hands, not just signatures." No one talked to him that way. Not at public events, not with cameras nearby, not women whose organizations depended on donors like him. "You think writing a check is easy?" he asked. "For you," she said. Yes. The answer should have offended him. Instead, it caught him. There was no cruelty in it. No attempt to embarrass him. Just truth, plain and steady. "And what would be hard?" he asked. Lena picked up one of the boxes of books and held it toward him, staying after the cameras leave. He could have laughed, made a polite excuse, and walked out. Instead, he took off his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and carried books into the children's room for the next hour. The room smelled like crayons, floor cleaner, and the macaroni casserole someone had brought for supper. Children ran between tables while older church ladies told them to slow down before the Lord made them slow down the hard way. Lena moved through it all like she belonged to every person there. Nathaniel watched her more than he meant to. She did not perform kindness. She practiced it. There was a difference. Over the next few months, he found reasons to return. First with another donation, then with a truckload of school supplies, then with no excuse at all. He helped paint a classroom on a Saturday morning and ruined a pair of Italian loafers in the process. Lena laughed so hard she had to sit on the church steps. "You know," she said, wiping her eyes. "For a man with that much money, you have very little common sense." "I'm learning. Paint first, expensive shoes later." That lesson was free. He brought coffee the next time. She corrected the order because he had guessed wrong. She liked hers with cream, no sugar. He remembered after that their first real conversation happened in the parking lot after a rainstorm. The asphalt shone under the street lights and the air smelled like wet pavement and magnolia. Lena had stayed late cleaning up after a tutoring program. Nathaniel had stayed because she had. "You always do this?" he asked. "Do what?" "Give away your evenings." She locked the church side door and slipped the keys into her purse. "They're not mine if somebody needs them more." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." She looked at him then. "But so is pretending you don't see people." That sentence stayed with him. He began to see people because Lena did. Children who came to tutoring hungry but said they were fine. Grandmothers raising grandchildren on fixed incomes. Fathers working 2 jobs and still showing up for parent meetings in paint-stained boots. Women who knew exactly which local officials promised help every election year and disappeared the day after. Lena never let him romanticize poverty. She hated that. She would say, "Don't make suffering noble just because you're uncomfortable looking at who caused it." Then she would hand him a broom or a box or a child's broken backpack and tell him to be useful. He fell in love with her before he admitted it. Maybe it was the night she sang softly in the church kitchen while washing dishes after a Thanksgiving meal for families who had nowhere else to go. Maybe it was the afternoon she told off a city official with such calm precision that Nathaniel nearly applauded. Maybe it was the first time she touched his wrist while laughing and his whole body seemed to remember something it had never known. When he finally kissed her, it was outside a diner off Cascade Road after midnight. They had eaten pancakes for dinner because Lena said grown people were allowed to be ridiculous if they paid their taxes. She tasted like coffee and maple syrup. Afterward, she looked at him and said, "You understand this won't be easy." He said, "I don't need easy." She gave him a sad little smile. Everybody says that before hard shows up, Hard showed up wearing Charles Widmore's face. The first time Nathaniel brought Lena to the old Widmore house for dinner, his father was polite in the way only cruel men with good manners could be. He complimented her work, asked about her background, used the word impressive like a glass wall. His mother, already frail by then, tried to be kind, but nervousness sat at the table with them like another guest. After Lena left, Charles poured a drink in the library and told Nathaniel, "She is lovely, but you cannot be serious." Nathaniel remembered the heat rising in his chest. "I am. She comes from a different world. So do most people. You know what I mean." "Yes," Nathaniel said, "that's the problem." Charles did not raise his voice. He never had to. A man in your position does not choose only for himself. The board watches. Investors watch. Families like ours survive because we understand perception. Her name is Lena, Nathaniel said, "not perception." Charles turned then slowly. "Do not be childish." It was the first time Nathaniel truly understood that his father's objection was not about Lena's character. It was about her color, her class, her refusal to be grateful for proximity to wealth. Charles would never say it crudely. He did not have to. Men like Charles had built entire rooms where prejudice could sit comfortably without ever removing its gloves. Nathaniel fought him. For Lena, he fought harder than he had ever fought for anything that did not have a financial statement attached to it. He moved her into the guest house when the attention became too much. He took her to charity dinners and stood beside her when people stared too long. He told himself that choosing her openly was enough. Then Lena became pregnant. For a little while, everything changed. Nathaniel remembered the night she told him. She stood in the kitchen holding the test in one hand, crying and laughing at the same time. He crossed the room and lifted her off the floor, and she scolded him because pregnant women are not business acquisitions. "Nate, you do not just pick us up without warning," but she was laughing when she said it. They chose the name Annie while sitting on the porch during a summer storm. Lena liked names that sounded gentle but had backbone. Nathaniel liked the way she said it. Annie, small, bright, strong. When Annie was born, Nathaniel cried in the hospital room quietly with his face pressed against Lena's hair. Lena held the baby against her chest and whispered, "Hi, my little heart. I have been waiting my whole life to meet you." Nathaniel had forgotten that. No, he had buried it. Now sitting on his bed years later with Annie beside him and Martha watching from the chair. It came back so clearly he could hear the rain outside that hospital window. Smell the antiseptic. Feel Lena's finger squeezing his hand. Annie looked at him. "Daddy." He blinked, returning to the bedroom. Martha was still there, quiet as prayer. Annie held up the loose bracelet. "Did Mommy really buy this for me?" Nathaniel looked at the silver heart, at the letter, at the photograph of the three of them before everything broke. "Yes," he said, "she did." "Did she love me when I was a baby?" His eyes filled again, but this time he did not look away. "Yes, Annie, she loved you from the very beginning." Annie seemed to take that into herself carefully. Like something precious she did not want to drop, Martha rose from the chair with a soft sound, her knees protesting. "Breakfast can wait," she said. "Some mornings are bigger than pancakes." Nathaniel looked at her. "Martha." She paused at the door. He held up the hidden note, the one with Savannah written on it. "Do you know anything about this?" Martha's face changed. "Not much, just enough." Enough for Nathaniel to understand that the box was not finished speaking. Martha looked toward Annie, then back at him. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "But if we're going to open that part of the past, you'd best sit down with more than a letter in your hand." Nathaniel was already sitting. Still, he understood what she meant. Some truths did not enter a room gently. They arrived like weather, and whatever had begun under his bed that morning was no longer about an old box, a forgotten photograph, or a bracelet too large for a child's wrist. It was about Lena Carter, the woman he had loved, the woman he had lost, and perhaps, God help him, the woman he had never truly known how to find. Martha did not answer immediately. She looked at Annie first, and that told Nathaniel more than words would have. Whatever she knew, she did not believe it belonged in a child's ears without care. Annie noticed, of course. Annie noticed everything. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked. Martha's face softened. "Because grown folks sometimes forget little ears are still hearts, baby." Annie frowned, glancing from Martha to Nathaniel. "I'm not a baby." "No," Martha said gently. "You're not. But some stories are heavy, even for grown people." Nathaniel folded the hidden note and set it beside the letter. The address in Savannah seemed to burn through the paper even after he turned it over. He wanted answers now. He wanted Martha to say everything plainly, to empty the past onto the bed with the photograph and the bracelet, to give him a shape for the dread tightening in his chest. But Annie was sitting close to him, still wearing Lena's bracelet, watching every adult in the room as if her whole life might be explained by the next sentence. He took a breath and forced himself to be a father before he was a wounded man. "Annie," he said, "why don't you go downstairs with Martha and have breakfast?" Her eyes narrowed. "You're going to talk without me for a little while about Mommy?" Nathaniel hesitated. "Yes, then I should stay. There it was. No anger, just a child's clean logic. Martha crossed the room and sat beside Annie, lowering herself carefully. Miss Annie, your daddy isn't trying to keep your mama from you. Not this time. The words landed hard. Nathaniel Clear's throat looked away. Annie caught the phrase anyway. Not this time. Martha sighed softly, the kind of sigh that carried years inside it. I mean, he needs a few minutes to understand things before he explains them to you. Annie turned to Nathaniel. Will you tell me after? He met her eyes. There was no room left in him for the easy lie. Yes, he said, I'll tell you what I can. I promise. She studied him for a second, then nodded. But not because she was satisfied. Because she trusted him enough to wait. That trust made him feel smaller than any accusation could have. Before she followed Martha, Annie took off the bracelet and placed it on the bed beside the photograph. I don't want it to fall, she said. Then, after a pause, don't put it back in the box. I won't, and don't close the box. Nathaniel looked at the open lid at the old things finally breathing in daylight. I won't close it. Annie went with Martha to the hallway, then stopped and looked back. Daddy, yes, if Mommy loved me, she wouldn't want me to be hungry, right? The question was so childlike, so painfully practical that Nathaniel almost broke again. No, he said softly. She wouldn't. Then I'll eat pancakes. Martha put a hand on her shoulder. That's good thinking. They disappeared down the hall. Annie's footsteps light, Martha slower and steady beside them. Nathaniel remained sitting on the edge of the bed, alone with the box. For the first time since Annie had found it, he allowed himself to pick up the photograph again without looking away. The picture was from the summer before everything fell apart. He remembered that now. Annie had been barely walking then, more determined than balanced, always reaching for table legs, pant cuffs, anything that might help her cross a room. Lena had called her my little storm because Annie never entered a place quietly. She arrived with noise, motion, and a certainty that the world would make room. Back then, Nathaniel had believed they were tired in the normal way new parents were tired. Bottles, diapers, midnight crying, doctor visits, teething, laundry that somehow multiplied by itself. He did not know that Lena's tiredness had begun to change into fear. Or maybe he had known and chosen not to look closely. The signs had been there, small ones at first. Lena stopped answering unknown numbers. When the phone rang, her shoulders tightened before she checked the screen. She began walking to the window whenever a car slowed outside the guest house. Once Nathaniel came home early and found her sitting on the nursery floor with Annie asleep against her chest, crying without sound. What happened? He had asked. She had wiped her face quickly. Nothing, just tired. He had believed her because believing her led him return to the office after dinner. Whitmore Group was expanding then. Charles had been pushing him harder every month, telling him that sentiment was what separated heirs from leaders. Nathaniel was trying to prove he could run the company without his father's hand on his shoulder. He spent long days downtown, late evenings in meetings, early mornings on calls. He told himself he was building a future for Lena and Annie. He did not see that the present was cracking. One night, he came home to find Lena in the kitchen, standing over a sink full of untouched dishes. Annie was in her high chair, asleep with one hand buried in mashed sweet potato. Lena had one hand pressed against the counter as if she needed it to remain upright. Hey, Nathaniel said, loosening his tie. I'm sorry I'm late. Lena did not turn around. Your father came by. The way she said it should have stopped him cold. Instead, he sighed, already tired of the old argument. What did he want? What he always wants, she said to remind me I'm temporary. Nathaniel moved closer. Lena, he didn't use those words. Men like your father don't have to. He asked if I had thought about Annie's future. He asked if I understood what kind of pressure your family name carries. He said, children can suffer when their mothers don't understand the world they're bringing them into. Nathaniel felt anger rise, but it was familiar anger, the kind he thought he knew how to manage. I'll talk to him, she turned then. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. Talking is what Whitmore men do when they want to delay doing. That stung. I've stood up for you. I know you have, she said, and the softness in her voice almost made it worse. But you still think this is about him not liking me. Nate, this is bigger than dinner table disapproval. Your father doesn't just want me gone from his house. He wants me gone from your life. He can want whatever he wants. And if he decides wanting isn't enough, Nathaniel remembered stepping closer, taking her face in his hands, promising her Charles could not touch them. He had meant it. God help him. He had meant every word. Lena had looked at him with such sadness that he mistook it for doubt in him, when maybe it had been knowledge of something already happening beyond his sight. 2 weeks later, she began packing small things and then unpacking them when he came into the room. Once he found a suitcase in the closet behind Annie's winter blankets. Lena said she was donating old clothes. He believed her because part of him wanted to believe anything that did not require fear. Then came the afternoon that divided his life into before and after. It had rained all morning. Not a gentle rain, but a hard Georgia rain that slapped against windows and turned the driveway slick and black. Nathaniel had come home early because a meeting ended badly, and he wanted an hour with Annie before dinner. The house seemed too quiet when he entered. He remembered water dripping from his coat onto the foyer floor. He remembered calling Lena's name. No answer. He found her in the front sitting room of the guest house, standing beside the coffee table. Annie was upstairs with a nanny, crying in that tired, angry way babies cried when sleep had betrayed them. Lena wore a tan coat he had not seen in months. Her hair was pulled back. Her face looked calm in the terrible way people look when they have already broken privately and have nothing left to break in public. On the coffee table sat the wooden box. "What's going on?" Nathaniel asked. Lena looked at him and for 1 second he saw the woman from the porch photograph. The woman who loved him. Then the expression disappeared under something practiced and unbearable. "I have to go." He laughed once because the words were too absurd to enter the room. "Seriously? Go where?" "I can't explain this right now." "Then explain it slowly." She flinched. That should have told him something. Instead, anger moved faster than understanding. Outside, a car horn sounded once. Nathaniel turned toward the window. A black sedan waited near the drive, windshield wipers moving back and forth. A man stood beside the passenger door under an umbrella. Daniel Price. Nathaniel knew Daniel only by name. Lena had said he was someone from her old neighborhood, someone who helped with community contacts, someone she trusted. In that moment, trust became the ugliest word Nathaniel knew. He looked back at Lena. "You're leaving with him." "Not the with him." Her eyes filled. "Please don't make this harder, harder." He heard his own voice rising. "We have a child upstairs." "I know." "Then tell him to leave." "I can't." The answer hit him like proof. He took a step back. "How long?" Lena stared at him. "What? How long has this been going on?" Her face changed. First confusion, then pain, then something like resignation. "It's not what you think." "Then say what it is." She opened her mouth. No words came. Upstairs, Annie cried harder. The sound tore through the room, but neither of them moved. Lena picked up the box and held it out to him with both hands. "Please," she whispered, "keep this." Nathaniel looked at it as if it were poison. "I don't want a souvenir for Annie. Don't use her name right now." Lena recoiled as if he had struck her. The memory made present-day Nathaniel lower his head. He had said that he had actually said that back then he had been too wounded to notice the way Lena clutched the box. How desperately she wanted him to take it. How her eyes kept moving toward the driveway as if time were running out. Finally, he took the box not gently. "What am I supposed to tell her?" Lena's lips trembled. "Tell her." She stopped, pressed one hand over her mouth, then forced herself to continue. "Tell her I loved her." "Loved," he said, past tense. Lena closed her eyes. Another horn sounded outside, shorter this time. She stepped toward him, then stopped herself. "Please don't hate me forever." Those were the last words she said to him in that room. She walked out into the rain. Nathaniel followed as far as the doorway. Daniel opened the car door. Lena turned back once, her face wet. Her eyes fixed not on Nathaniel, but on the upstairs window where Annie's crying had become a thin, tired wail. Then she got into the car. Nathaniel watched the black sedan roll down the driveway and disappear beyond the gate. He stood there until the rain soaked through his shirt. When he finally went back inside, the box was still on the coffee table. Annie was still crying. He went upstairs, lifted his daughter from the crib, and held her against him while she screamed into his shoulder. He remembered whispering, "I've got you. I've got you," over and over as much to himself as to her. Later that night, after Annie finally slept, Nathaniel opened the box. He saw the photograph first. It hurt too much, so he pushed it aside. He saw the bracelet, the little silver heart, the letter A. He closed his fist around it until the charm dug into his palm. Then he opened the letter and read the first line. "Nate, please forgive me." That was all. He decided forgiveness meant confession. He decided the box was an insult. He decided Lena had left him a pretty arrangement of guilt and memory. Because she wanted to make her betrayal look tender. He carried the box to the fireplace. The flames were high. He opened the lid and held the box out for one long second. He was ready to let everything burn. Then Annie cried upstairs. Not loud, just a small sound in her sleep. Nathaniel looked down at the bracelet. He thought of Lena buying it for their daughter. He thought of Annie someday asking questions. He thought of throwing away the only pieces of her mother she might ever have. His arm lowered. He did not forgive Lena. He did not understand her. He did not read the rest. But he kept the box. He carried it upstairs, placed it under his bed, shoved it behind old blankets in a leather document case, and told himself he would deal with it when Annie was older. Then 1 year became 2, 2 became 5. Work filled the days. Fatherhood filled the mornings and nights. Annie grew from a baby into a little girl who asked why some families had mothers at school pickup and some did not. Nathaniel built answers out of fog and called them kindness. Now the fog was burning away. He looked at the open box in front of him, at the letter he had finally read past the first line. At the hidden note that said, "Daniel is not the man I love." He heard Lena's voice again. "Please don't hate me forever." The words were different now. Not an excuse, not a farewell, a plea. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Martha returned without Annie, carrying a tray with coffee, toast, and a small plate of pancakes cut into careful pieces. "She's eating in the breakfast room," Martha said, trying to pretend she isn't listening with her whole body. Nathaniel looked up. Martha set the tray down on the dresser, then noticed the expression on his face and did not offer food. She sat in the chair again. He held up the note. "I remembered the day she left." Martha nodded slowly. "I thought Daniel was taking her from me." Martha's gaze dropped. "Was he?" Nathaniel asked. The room seemed to wait with him. Martha folded her hands in her lap. "No, sir," she said quietly. "I don't believe he was." Nathaniel's breath caught, though part of him had already known. Martha looked toward the hallway where Annie's small voice could faintly be heard asking someone downstairs if pancakes could get cold and still be happy. Then she turned back to Nathaniel. "Before Miss Lena left," Martha said, "she came to me in the laundry room. She was shaking so bad she could hardly hold the door. She told me if anything happened, I was to make sure Annie knew her mama loved her." Nathaniel leaned forward, every muscle in him tightening. "Why didn't you tell me?" Martha's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "Because your father came to see me that same evening." Nathaniel went still. Martha's voice remained soft, but something old and ashamed moved beneath it. "Charles Whitmore told me I had a good job, good health insurance for my husband and grandchildren who might need recommendations one day. He said, grief makes people confused, and confused people sometimes repeat stories they don't understand." Nathaniel shut his eyes. "He threatened you?" "Yes, sir, and I never knew." "No, sir." The silence after that was worse than shouting. Nathaniel stood and walked to the window. Outside, the lawn was bright now, washed clean by morning sun. The kind of morning that looked innocent if you did not know what had already happened inside it, behind him. Martha said, "Pain can make a man blind, Mr. Nathaniel, but pride can keep him blind." He looked back at the box. For 5 years, he had called Lena the one who left. But the box was telling him something else. Martha was telling him something else. And somewhere in Savannah, written in Lena's hand, there was an address that might finally tell him whether the woman he had mourned as a betrayal had been trying all along to survive. Nathaniel turned from the window. "Pack a bag for Annie," he said. Martha studied him. "Where are we going?" He picked up the hidden note. "Savannah." Annie did not understand Savannah as a place. To her, it was only a word adults said in a lowered voice. The way they said hospital, lawyer, or storm warning. She sat at the breakfast room table with a half-eaten pancake in front of her. The silver bracelet lying beside her plate on a folded napkin because Nathaniel had told her not to wear it while eating syrup. She kept touching it anyway, one finger tapping the little heart charm, as if checking that it was still real. Martha had cut the pancakes into small triangles, the way Annie liked them. But Annie was not eating much. Her eyes kept going toward the ceiling, toward the room where her father had stayed after saying they were going to Savannah. The house around her felt different now. The same white walls, the same polished floors, the same quiet staff moving carefully through wide hallways. And yet, everything seemed to be listening. "Is Savannah far?" Annie asked. Martha was at the sideboard pouring orange juice into a glass. She turned with that slow, careful patience that made children feel they were being taken seriously. "A few hours by car, baby, like going to the beach. Longer than the beach we usually go to. Shorter than a whole day." Annie considered this. "Will Mommy be there?" Martha's hand paused over the glass. "I don't know," she said gently. "But the paper said Savannah." "Yes, it did, so maybe she's there, maybe." Annie frowned at the pancake in front of her. "Grown-ups say maybe when they don't want to say no." Martha came over and sat across from her. "Sometimes grown-ups say maybe because the truth hasn't finished introducing itself." Annie looked at her for a long second. "That sounds like church." Martha gave a soft laugh. "Most useful things do." Annie picked up the bracelet and held it in both hands. "If Mommy bought this for me, she knew me. She knew you, baby. But I was little." "Yes. How can somebody know a baby?" Martha leaned back, her face softening with memory. "A mother knows a baby in ways that don't need words. She knows the sound of one cry from another. She knows when the baby is hungry, when she's sleepy, when she just wants to be held. She knows the weight of her in her arms. She knows the smell of her hair after a bath. That kind of knowing stays." Annie looked down. "Even if she goes away." Martha did not answer too fast. Even then, upstairs, Nathaniel stood alone in his bedroom with the box still open on the bed. He had packed nothing. He had only walked from the window back to the bed, then from the bed to the dresser, then back again, as if motion might organize what the past had scattered. The photograph, the letter, the bracelet cloth, and the hidden note were laid out in front of him. He had moved them into a careful line without realizing it, turning grief into an arrangement because that was what he did with things he could not control. He picked up the letter again. This time he forced himself to read it from the beginning without stopping. Nate, please forgive me. There are things I do not know how to say without breaking you. One day, when Annie is old enough, please give her the bracelet. Tell her I bought it before she was born, when I still believed love could protect us from everything. And if you ever loved me truly, do not let our little girl grow up believing her mother left because she was unwanted. He stopped there, not because he had not read those words already, but because now he heard them differently. The first time, minutes ago, they had struck him as sorrow. Now they sounded like instruction. Lena had known exactly what silence could do to a child. She had feared not only being separated from Annie, but being rewritten in Annie's heart as a mother who did not care. Nathaniel read on. I cannot explain all of this in the time I have. If I try, they will stop me. If I stay, they will take what little power I have left and use it against you, against me, maybe even against Annie. I know you will be angry. I know what this will look like. That is why I am begging you not to trust only what you see. He lowered the letter, his breath shallow. They, not he, they. How many people had been involved? His father certainly, maybe lawyers, maybe staff, maybe men paid to make problems disappear politely. The Whitmore name was not just a name. It was a machine. And Nathaniel had spent most of his adult life learning how efficiently that machine could move when someone powerful wanted something badly enough. He hated that thought. He hated more that he believed it. A knock came at the open door. Martha stood there, Annie beside her with the bracelet now held against her chest. Annie looked small in the doorway, but not fragile. There was a determination in her face. Nathaniel recognized from Lena, and before that morning, he might have turned away from the resemblance because it hurt. Now he found himself grateful for it. Daddy, Annie said. Are we going today? Nathaniel folded the letter carefully. Yes. Do I need my backpack? Yes. Pack mister. Buttons, your blue sweater, and the book you like for long drives. The one about the mouse. The mouse detective. Yes. Annie nodded. Then she stepped into the room and looked at the box. Is mommy's stuff coming, too? Nathaniel looked at the photograph, the bracelet, the note. Yes, it's coming with us. All of it, all of it. She seemed relieved. Good. I don't think it wants to stay under the bed. Martha closed her eyes briefly, as if the child had said more truth than she knew. Nathaniel turned to Martha. Can you pack for 2 nights? You think we'll be gone that long? I don't know what we'll find. That means yes, Martha said. He almost smiled. That means yes. Annie climbed onto the bed and sat near the box, careful not to touch the papers now. Her voice grew quieter. Daddy, if we find mommy, will she know me? The question moved straight through him. He sat beside her. He did not pick her up, though he wanted to. Annie had begun asking questions that required him not to hide her in his arms before answering. I don't know if we'll find her today, he said. But if we do, he looked at the bracelet in her hands. If we do, I think she'll know you. How? Because mothers remember. That's what Martha said. Martha is usually right. From the doorway, Martha made a small sound that might have been agreement and might have been warning not to overstate the matter. Annie looked at the photograph. Do you think she'll be mad I opened the box? No, Nathaniel said. I think she'd be glad you found it. Why? Because I should have opened it properly a long time ago. Annie studied him. You did open it. Yes, he said, but sometimes opening something and facing it are not the same thing. She frowned. That's another grown-up sentence. I know. It means you looked but didn't look. Nathaniel let out a quiet breath. Yes, that's exactly what it means. Annie seemed satisfied with having translated him. She slipped the bracelet over her wrist again. It slid down immediately and she caught it with her fingers. I'm wearing it to Savannah. It may fall off. I'll hold it, Annie. It's mine, she said, not loudly, but with certainty. Nathaniel looked at her, then nodded. Yes, it is. The next hour moved quickly, but beneath everything ran a current of disbelief. Nathaniel canceled the board call with one sentence to his assistant. Family emergency. He ignored the immediate replies. Men who had known him for years sent messages asking whether they should reschedule, whether the acquisition was in danger, whether he understood how poorly this might look. He turned the phone off after the 5th message. For once, the empire could wait. Martha packed with the efficiency of a woman who had raised households through births, deaths, bad weather, and family arguments no one outside the house ever heard about. She put Annie's clothes in a small pink suitcase, added an extra sweater because southern weather had moods, tucked snacks into a canvas bag, and made Nathaniel a travel mug of coffee he forgot on the counter until she placed it directly in his hand. You may be rich, she said, but you still get headaches when you don't drink coffee. Yes, ma'am, he said automatically. She lifted an eyebrow. Don't you start acting respectful now just because your world is falling apart. Annie giggled for the first time that morning. That small sound steadied him more than the coffee did. Before they left, Nathaniel returned to his bedroom one last time. He placed the photograph, the letter, the hidden note, and the cloth into the box. Annie insisted on carrying the bracelet herself. He looked at the space beneath the bed where the box had been hidden for 5 years. Dust had gathered in the empty rectangle it left behind. It struck him then how much of life could be shaped by what a person refused to look at. He had walked over that box every morning. He had slept above it every night. He had answered Annie's questions inches from it, dressed for work beside it, brought women nowhere near his heart into rooms that shared a wall with it. And still he had told himself the past was behind him. The past had been under his bed, waiting. Downstairs, Annie stood by the front door with Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm and the bracelet clenched in her fist. Martha wore her Sunday cardigan, though it was Thursday, because she believed uncertain journeys required decent clothing. Nathaniel carried the box himself. As they stepped outside, the Atlanta morning had turned bright and clean. The driveway curved toward the black iron gate. Beyond it, the city moved on without knowing that one family's history had cracked open inside a house on a hill. Annie looked up at him. "Daddy, yes, are you scared?" He considered lying. The old instinct was there to protect her, to protect himself, to sound certain. Instead, he looked down at the box in his hands. "Yes," he said, "a little." She nodded seriously. "Me, too." He opened the rear door of the Range Rover and helped her climb in. "Then we'll be scared together. Is that better?" He buckled her seat belt, then tucked Mr. Buttons beside her. "It's better than being scared alone." Martha settled into the passenger seat. Nathaniel placed the box on the center console for a moment while he started the engine. Then he looked at it, changed his mind, and handed it back to Annie. "Hold this for me." Her eyes widened at the responsibility. "Really, really." She placed the box carefully on her lap with the bracelet resting on top of it like a small silver promise. Nathaniel drove down the long driveway. When the gate opened, he felt something in his chest open with it, though not gently. The road beyond the estate waited under the morning sun, leading south and east toward Savannah, toward an address written by a woman he had loved, judged, lost, and perhaps never truly understood. As the car turned onto the main road, Annie looked out the window and whispered almost to herself. "Mommy, we're coming." Nathaniel heard her. He did not correct her. He did not tell her not to hope. He did not say maybe or we'll see or any of the careful phrases adults use when they are afraid of being blamed by disappointment. He only kept both hands on the wheel and drove while the old box rested in his daughter's lap in the first honest mile of the journey passed beneath them. The highway out of Atlanta opened in long gray ribbons beneath the morning sun. Nathaniel drove without speaking for the first 20 meters, both hands fixed on the wheel, his posture straight, his eyes forward. It was the same way he drove to board meetings, charity dinners, court-ordered depositions, and hospital galas, as if control could be measured by how little a man moved. But Annie, sitting behind him with the old box on her lap, knew something was different. Every few minutes, her father glanced in the rear-view mirror, not at traffic, but at the box. Martha noticed, too. She sat in the passenger seat with her purse tucked neatly at her feet and a paper napkin folded in her lap around 2 biscuits she had insisted on bringing. She had lived long enough to know that men who forgot breakfast usually remembered regret. Every now and then she looked over at Nathaniel, then back toward Annie, then out at the passing trees, her face carrying the quiet heaviness of a person approaching a place in memory she had avoided for years. Annie ran her thumb over the dusty lid of the box. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." "Was Mommy scared of Grandpa Charles?" Nathaniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Martha closed her eyes for half a second. "That's a big question," Nathaniel said. "I know." He looked at her through the mirror. "Why are you asking that?" "Because the paper said before your father finds me." Annie said it slowly, trying to remember the words exactly. "That sounds like hiding." Nathaniel took a breath. He had forgotten how sharp children could be when adults stopped distracting them. Annie did not understand contracts, race, family power, old money, legal threats, or the polite violence of men like Charles Whitmore. But she understood hiding. She understood fear. She understood that people did not run unless something was chasing them. "I think," Nathaniel said carefully, "your mother may have been scared of what my father could do." To her, yes, to May. The question came so quietly that Nathaniel almost missed it beneath the hum of the tires. He forced himself to answer. "Maybe, or maybe she was scared of losing you." Annie looked down at the bracelet resting on top of the box. It was wrapped loosely around 2 of her fingers because she had tried wearing it again and nearly dropped it under the seat. "But she lost me anyway." Martha turned slightly in her seat, her expression tender but firm. "Sometimes, baby, grown people make choices because every road in front of them looks like it hurts somebody." "That doesn't sound fair." "No," Martha said, "it surely doesn't." Annie leaned back, frowning at the window. "Then why do people say life is fair?" Martha gave a low hum. "Mostly people say that when life has been fair enough to them." Nathaniel heard the words and felt them settle in the car. They passed a gas station with an American flag moving lazily in the morning wind. A church sign that read, "Grace is not earned," and a field where two old men in caps stood beside a pickup truck, talking with the solemn dedication of men solving either a fence problem or the state of the nation. It was the kind of Georgia morning he had driven through all his life without really seeing. Now every small thing looked sharper. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Families stopping for coffee. Mothers lifting children from minivans. Fathers pumping gas. Lives that could be bruised by decisions made in rooms they would never enter. "Mr. Nathaniel," Martha said after a while. "We need to talk before we get to Savannah." His eyes stayed on the road. "About what?" "About Mrs. Rosebell." Annie perked up. "Who's that?" Martha looked back at her. "A woman who used to know your mama." "Is she nice?" Martha hesitated just long enough for Annie to notice. "She is truthful," Martha said. "That's better than nice when you need answers." Nathaniel glanced at her. "You know the woman at that address?" "I know of her. Lena mentioned her once, maybe twice, and you didn't tell me." Martha's face did not harden, but something in it closed a little. "You weren't asking." The answer struck clean because it was true. Nathaniel said nothing. Martha looked out the windshield. After Lena left, this house turned into a museum of what nobody was allowed to mention. "You took care of Annie." "Yes. Don't think I'm saying you didn't. You fed her, dressed her, sat up with her when she had fevers, learned to do her hair better than most men would even try. You loved that child with both hands. But Lena's name, that name was locked up tighter than your office safe." Annie watched the back of her father's head. Nathaniel's voice came quieter. "I thought I was protecting her." "Which her?" Martha asked. He looked over. Martha did not look away. "Annie or yourself?" Annie did not fully understand the question, but she understood enough to go still. Nathaniel swallowed. "Both maybe." Martha nodded. "That sounds closer to honest." For several miles, no one spoke. The road rolled beneath them, carrying the car away from Atlanta's glass towers and gated hills and toward older roads where trees leaned low and history seemed to sit closer to the ground. Annie eventually opened the book about the mouse detective, but she did not read. She held it open on her lap with the box beneath it, as if pretending to be busy might make the grown-up say more. Nathaniel finally broke the silence. "Tell me what Lena said to you before she left." Martha sighed. "I told you some of it." "Tell me all of it." Martha was quiet long enough that Annie looked up from her book. "It was the day before," Martha said. "Not the day she left. The day before. I was in the laundry room folding towels. Your father had come by earlier and the house had gone cold the way it always did. When Mr. Charles stepped inside, Lena came down the back stairs holding Annie's little yellow blanket. She had been crying, but she'd washed her face. I remember that because her eyes were red and her cheeks were damp at the edges like she'd tried to erase the evidence." Nathaniel listened without moving. "She shut the laundry room door and asked me if I believed a mother could love her child and still leave. I told her I didn't like the sound of that question. She said, 'Neither do I.' Then she handed me that blanket and said if things went wrong, I was to make sure Annie knew she had been loved every day of her life." Annie whispered, "My yellow blanket." Martha turned. "Yes, baby, you dragged that thing around until it was more whole than blanket." "I don't remember." "No, but your mama did." Annie looked down at the bracelet again. Nathaniel's voice was strained. "Why didn't you come to me then?" "I almost did," Martha said. "I made it as far as the hall outside your study. But Charles was there." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "He told me grief and confusion make women dramatic. He said Lena was unstable, that she was making accusations, that she might try to embarrass the family. Then he reminded me my husband's treatments were being covered through the household insurance. He mentioned my son's job application at one of your warehouses. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to." Annie looked from Martha to Nathaniel. "Grandpa Charles did that." Nathaniel hated that she had to hear it. He hated more that hiding it would be another brick in the same wall. "Yes," he said. "It sounds like he did, but he's your daddy." Nathaniel's eyes burned. "Yes, daddies aren't supposed to be mean." Martha's voice came softly. "No, baby, they aren't." Annie hugged Mr. Buttons closer. "Is he mean to me?" Nathaniel looked at her in the mirror, and the question pierced something deep. Charles had never shouted at Annie. He sent birthday gifts, stiff dresses, expensive dolls she did not play with, books with gold-edged pages. He kissed her forehead on holidays and called her the child. More often than her name. When he thought Nathaniel could not hear, Nathaniel had noticed. He had told himself it was generational distance, awkwardness, old Whitmore, formality. How many things had he renamed so he would not have to confront them? "I won't let him be," Nathaniel said. Annie did not seem completely satisfied, but she accepted the promise for now. They stopped just outside Min at a roadside diner with red vinyl booths and coffee strong enough to qualify as an opinion. Martha insisted everyone needed real food, and Nathaniel, who had spent years making billion-dollar decisions on an empty stomach, did not argue. Annie ordered grilled cheese and fries, then asked the waitress if they had Pancakes, even though she had barely touched the ones at home. The waitress, a woman with silver hair piled high and a name tag that said Darlene, told her breakfast was served all day because this is still America. Honey, and Annie smiled for the first time since they left the house. Nathaniel sat across from her, the box on the booth seat beside him. He had not wanted to leave it in the car. Darlene poured coffee for Nathaniel and sweet tea for Martha. She gave Annie extra napkins without being asked. The old Southern instinct for children and sticky fingers. You folks headed somewhere special? Darlene asked. Nathaniel hesitated. Martha answered before he could make it complicated. Savannah. Darlene nodded. Pretty city. Hard city, too, depending on what you're carrying. Nathaniel looked up. Darlene tapped the coffee pot lightly against the rim of his mug. Most people don't sit with a box like that unless it's got more than junk in it. Then she walked away before anyone could respond. Annie leaned forward. Everybody knows the box is important. Nathaniel almost laughed apparently. Martha stirred her tea. Some things announced themselves. Annie ate half a pancake and 3 fries before asking, "When we get to Mrs. Rose Bell, will she tell us if Mommy loved me?" Nathaniel set his coffee down. "I think we already know that. I want more proof." The honesty of it made Martha's face soften. Nathaniel reached across the table and took Annie's hand. "Then we'll ask for more." After lunch, they returned to the road. Annie fell asleep within 20 minutes, the way children do when emotion exhausts them more than distance. Mr. Buttons was tucked under her chin, the bracelet curled in her small fist, the box secured beside her with the seat belt because she had insisted it needed one too. With Annie asleep, Martha lowered her voice. "There's one more thing." Nathaniel kept his eyes on the road. "Say it." Lena once told me that if she vanished, there were only 2 people she trusted not to sell her out. One was Daniel Price and the other. Martha looked at the passing trees. Rose Bell. Nathaniel absorbed that. Why? Because Rose knew what it meant to have people decide a woman's life for her. Clear's throat. Her husband died young. White bankers tried to take her house twice. She kept it both times. Lena said, "Mrs. Bell had a spine made of railroad iron and a heart softer than she wanted anybody to know." Nathaniel looked down at the GPS. Less than an hour to Savannah, he thought of the hidden note. "Daniel is not the man I love. He is the only one who can get me away before your father finds me." He thought of Martha in the laundry room, Lena with Annie's yellow blanket. Charles turning threats into etiquette. He thought of all the times Annie had asked about her mother and he had answered from the wound instead of the truth. The road curved beneath a canopy of trees, sunlight breaking through and flickers across the windshield. In the back seat, Annie stirred and murmured something in her sleep. Nathaniel looked in the mirror. "What did she say?" Martha asked. He listened. Annie said it again, barely audible. "Mommy." Nathaniel felt his throat tighten. Martha did not speak for a long time. Then almost to herself, she said, "A child will call for what belongs to her, even if the world hides it." Nathaniel drove on. By late afternoon, Savannah began to gather around them. Old brick, hanging moss, narrow streets, iron balconies, live oaks spreading their arms over the road like guardians of things remembered and things buried. The GPS led them away from the polished tourist squares and deeper into a quieter neighborhood where the houses were smaller, older, and cared for with pride. Potted plants lined porches. Wind chimes moved in the soft air. Somewhere, someone was frying something with onions, and the smell drifted through the open car vents. Annie woke as they turned onto a street shaded by oak trees. "Are we there?" Nathaniel looked at the house number on the folded note, then at the small blue house ahead with a white porch, a rocking chair, and ferns hanging from hooks. "I think so," he said. Annie sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. Martha looked at the house and exhaled. That would be Mrs. Bell's place. Nathaniel parked by the curb, but did not immediately get out. The box sat in the back seat between Annie and the door. The address that had lived hidden in its lining for years had brought them here. To this quiet porch, this old blue house, this next door in the past. Annie reached forward and touched his shoulder. "Daddy." He turned. She held up the bracelet. "Should I bring it?" Nathaniel looked at the house, then at his daughter. "Yes," he said. "I think she'll want to see it." Martha opened her door first slowly, with the dignity of someone arriving, not as a stranger, but as a witness. Nathaniel stepped out next and took the box. Annie came last, clutching the bracelet in one hand and Mr. Buttons in the other. They walked up the path together. Before Nathaniel could knock, the front door opened. An elderly black woman stood there in a pale blue house dress. One hand on the door frame, silver hair pinned neatly back, eyes sharp enough to cut through every excuse a man might carry. She looked at Nathaniel, then at Annie, then at the box in his hands. Her face changed, but only for a second. "Well," she said, "took you long enough." Nathaniel had heard men insult him in boardrooms, threaten him through attorneys, challenge him across polished conference tables, and lie to his face while smiling for cameras. None of it had ever landed quite like the old woman's first sentence. "Took you long enough." There was no shouting in it, No accusation dressed up for drama, just a simple statement delivered from the doorway of a small blue house in Savannah by a woman who looked as if she had spent years keeping score and had no intention of adjusting the numbers to protect his feelings. Nathaniel stood on the porch with the box in his hands, Annie half hidden behind his leg, and Martha beside him with her purse held tight against her ribs. The air smelled of fried onions, warm wood, and the heavy sweetness of jasmine climbing somewhere along the fence. A ceiling fan turned lazily above the porch, stirring the heat without defeating it. "Mrs. Bell?" Nathaniel asked, though he already knew. The woman looked him up and down. "You know any other old woman in Savannah who opens the door before you knock?" Martha cleared her throat softly. "Rose." Mrs. Bell's eyes moved to Martha. Something in her face softened, though only by a little. "Martha Green. I wondered if the Lord would send you with him or make him stumble in here alone." "I came for the child," Martha said. "That makes two of us." Annie stepped out slightly at that. She was clutching the silver bracelet in one hand and Mr. Buttons in the other. Her eyes stayed on Mrs. Bell, with the cautious curiosity of a child who had learned in one long day that adults could contain whole rooms full of secrets. Mrs. Bell looked at her and for the first time her stern expression broke. Her hand lifted to her chest. "Well, sweet mercy," she whispered. "You've got Lena's eyes when you're thinking hard." Annie looked up at Nathaniel, then back at the old woman. "You knew my mommy." Mrs. Bell swallowed before answering. "Yes, baby, I knew your mama. Was she here?" Mrs. Bell opened the door wider. "Come inside." Questions like that deserve a chair, not a porch. The house was small, but cared for with the kind of pride money could not imitate. Lace curtains hung in the windows. A worn Bible sat on a side table beside a pair of reading glasses. Family photographs crowded the mantel, some in matching frames, others tucked behind one another as if the living and the dead had agreed to share the same shelf. The air inside was cooler than the porch and smelled faintly of lemon oil, peach cobbler, and old paper. Annie noticed the cobbler first. Martha noticed the photographs. Nathaniel noticed that there was no dust anywhere. Mrs. Bell led them to the sitting room and motioned toward the sofa. "Sit, all of you. I'm old enough to make people sit before I tell them hard things." Nathaniel sat on the edge of the sofa with the box in his lap. Annie sat close enough for her shoulder to touch his arm. Martha took the armchair near the window, her face composed but watchful. Mrs. Bell did not sit right away. She went to the kitchen and returned with a pitcher of sweet tea, 4 glasses, and a small plate of butter cookies. She placed one glass in front of Annie first. "Children get served before grief," she said. Annie looked at the glass. "Thank you, ma'am." Mrs. Bell's eyebrows lifted. "Somebody taught you manners." Martha did. "And your daddy remembered to listen, I hope." Annie glanced at Nathaniel. "Sometimes." Mrs. Bell gave a short laugh, and the sound loosened something in the room. Then she sat across from them, folded her hands, and looked at Nathaniel. "So," she said, "you finally opened the box." Nathaniel rested one hand on the lid. "Annie found it." "Of course, she did." Mrs. Bell nodded slowly. "Children have a way of finding what grown folks hide, and then asking why it was in the dark." Nathaniel accepted the rebuke because it was deserved. "I didn't remember the box." Mrs. Bell's face hardened. "No, you chose not to remember it until forgetting got comfortable." Martha looked down at her hands. Annie frowned. "Daddy didn't mean to." Mrs. Bell's eyes softened toward her. "I believe that, baby. But not meaning harm doesn't mean no harm was done." Nathaniel lowered his gaze to the box. "You're right." The old woman studied him for a moment, perhaps surprised he did not defend himself. Then she nodded once, as if allowing the conversation to continue. "Lena came here after she left Atlanta." Mrs. Bell said, "That much you've already guessed." Nathaniel felt Annie lean closer. "She stayed in the back room." Mrs. Bell continued, "Wouldn't sleep in the bed the first 2 nights, sat in the chair by the window, holding a baby blanket and watching the street. Every car that slowed down, she froze. Every phone call she shook. That girl did not look like a woman running off to romance. She looked like a woman waiting for someone to drag her back by the soul." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Annie's voice was small. "Did she cry?" Mrs. Bell looked at her. "Yes, I looked. Yes, baby, a lot. Because of me." "No." Mrs. Bell leaned forward, her voice firm. "Now you listen to me, Annie. Your mama cried because she loved you and could not get to you. That is a different kind of crying. Don't you ever confuse it with not wanting you." Annie absorbed this with a seriousness that made Nathaniel's chest ache. Mrs. Bell rose and crossed to the mantel from behind a framed photograph of a young man in military uniform. She took an old envelope. It had yellowed at the corners and been opened and closed many times. She held it for a moment before handing it to Nathaniel. "She left this with me," Mrs. Bell said. "Told me if you ever came asking with honest eyes, I could give it to you." Nathaniel looked up. "And if I came without honest eyes, I was going to tell you to get off my porch." Martha made a low sound that might have been approval. Nathaniel opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a small photograph and a folded sheet of paper. The photograph showed Annie as a baby sitting on a quilt Nathaniel recognized from the nursery wearing a yellow onesie and reaching toward the camera with a gummy smile. He had never seen it before. Annie gasped, "That's me." "Yes, Mrs. Bell said. "Your mama kept that picture in her wallet. Took it out so often the edges wore soft." Nathaniel turned the photograph over. On the back in Lena's handwriting were the words, "My baby turned 1 today. I was not allowed to call." The sentence hit harder than he expected. Not allowed. He stared at it until the letters blurred. Annie tried to see. "What does it say?" Nathaniel hesitated. "Mrs. Bell answered for him gently but without hiding. "It says your mama remembered your birthday." Annie's face changed. "She did. Every year I knew her. Mrs. Bell said she baked a little cake on your birthday. Didn't matter if she had nobody to serve it to one candle. Sometimes she sang. Sometimes she couldn't finish." Annie looked down at the bracelet in her hand. "She had cake for me." "She did. What kind?" Mrs. Bell smiled sadly. "Vanilla with strawberry frosting, said she thought you'd like pink." Annie looked at Nathaniel. "I do like pink." "I know," he whispered. Mrs. Bell handed him the folded paper next. Nathaniel opened it. It was not a full letter, more like a page torn from a notebook. "Nate, if you are reading this, then maybe the world finally got tired of lying. I was here. I waited for you. I tried to call twice. The number changed. I wrote 3 letters. They came back unopened. Rose told me to stop bleeding on paper for people who had boarded up the door, but I couldn't stop." Annie deserved a mother who tried. Even if trying failed, Nathaniel pressed his fist against his mouth. Mrs. Bell watched him without pity. Maybe pity would have been easier. What she offered instead was witness. "She mailed those letters?" he asked. "I walked with her to the post office myself. They never came." "I know." He looked up. "How do you know?" "Because one came back here with a mark on it saying the address was invalid. But that house in Atlanta had not moved an inch. Somebody made sure the letters didn't reach you." "Charles." The name entered the room though no one spoke it. Martha closed her eyes. Annie looked from face to face. "Who stopped the letters?" Nathaniel's mouth went dry. "I don't know for sure yet." Mrs. Bell gave him a look that said he knew enough. Annie was quiet a moment, then asked, "Did Mommy think I forgot her?" Mrs. Bell reached across the space between them and held out her hand. Annie hesitated, then placed her small hand in the old woman's palm. "Your mama worried about many things," Mrs. Bell said, "but mostly she worried you would be told she didn't love you. She said that would be worse than being hated because a child can grow around anger, but feeling unwanted hollows a child out." Nathaniel looked away. That was exactly what his silence had nearly done. "I told Annie she had to go away," he said, voice low. "That was all I ever said." Mrs. Bell's expression softened, but only slightly. "Sometimes all is still not enough." "I know." "No," she said, "you're beginning to know. That's different." Annie squeezed Mrs. Bell's hand. "Do you know where Mommy is now?" The room went still. Mrs. Bell leaned back slowly. Her eyes moved to Martha, then to Nathaniel. "I know where she was," she said. Nathaniel sat forward. "Where?" "After Savannah. She went to Charleston for a while, then buffered. Then I lost track." "Why?" "Because she stopped writing me." Nathaniel's heart sank. Mrs. Bell raised a hand, but not because she wanted to. "Last card I got was from a little coastal town in South Carolina. She said she was working under another name. Said she was tired of looking over her shoulder. But she still kept Annie's picture by her bed." Annie whispered. "By her bed." Mrs. Bell nodded right where she could see it when she woke up. Nathaniel felt the road ahead changing shape. Savannah had not ended the search. It had only confirmed that there was a search to make. "Do you still have the card?" he asked. Mrs. Bell looked at him for a long moment. "I do." She stood again slower this time and went to a small writing desk near the window. She unlocked the top drawer with a key she wore on a chain beneath her dress. From inside, she removed another envelope, thinner and newer than the first. "I kept these things because Lena asked me to," she said, "but also because I knew one day that little girl might come looking for proof that she had been loved." She placed the envelope in Annie's lap, not Nathaniel's. "Some proof belongs to the child first." Annie looked at Nathaniel for permission. He nodded. She opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a postcard showing a quiet beach at sunset. On the back, Lena had written only a few lines. "Rose, I'm still breathing. Tell the walls I haven't forgotten my baby. If God is kind, one day she'll know I did not leave because I stopped loving her. I left because I thought leaving was the only door they had not locked." Annie could not read all the words. Not smoothly, but she recognized one. "Baby," she said. Mrs. Bell's voice trembled for the first time. "That was you." Annie held the postcard against her chest, bracelet pressed between paper and sweater. Nathaniel felt something inside him settle into a shape too painful to deny. Lena had not vanished into betrayal. She had left a trail, a box, a note, a photograph, a letter, a postcard, witnesses, small pieces of truth scattered across years, waiting for someone brave enough or guilty enough to follow them. He looked at Mrs. Bell. There was a man, Daniel Price. Mrs. Bell's mouth tightened. Daniel helped her leave Atlanta. He wasn't her lover. No, she said it with such certainty that Nathaniel felt shame rise again. He was family, not blood close, but close enough when danger came. He drove her here, stayed one night on that sofa, then went back because he said someone needed to keep an eye on what the Witters were doing. Nathaniel stared at the rug beneath his shoes. For years, he had made Daniel the villain because it was easier than imagining Lena afraid. "Do you know where he is?" Nathaniel asked. Mrs. Bell nodded. "Same county last I heard. Man never did have the sense to move far from trouble." Martha looked at Nathaniel. "We need to speak with him." "Yes," Nathaniel said. Annie sat very still holding the postcard. "Is he the one who took Mommy away?" Nathaniel turned to her carefully. "I thought he was." "Was he?" Mrs. Bell answered before Nathaniel could. "He drove the car, baby. But he wasn't the reason she had to get in it." Annie thought about that. It was a hard distinction, but she seemed to understand enough. Nathaniel stood, still holding the first envelope. "Mrs. Bell, I owe you." "No," she interrupted. "You owe Lena. You owe that child. You owe the truth. Don't waste apology on me just because I'm standing closest." He nodded. She walked them to the door when it was time to leave. On the porch, the late afternoon light had turned gold across the small yard. Annie lingered near the steps, looking back at the blue house as if it had become part of her. Mrs. Bell bent down with effort until her eyes were near Annie's. "You come back someday," she said. "Not because of sorrow, just because old women like visitors who know how to say thank you." Annie stepped forward and hugged her. Mrs. Bell closed her eyes and held the child carefully, fiercely, as though embracing someone else through her. When Annie pulled away, she said, "Thank you for keeping Mommy's proof." Mrs. Bell's lips trembled. "You're welcome, baby." Nathaniel helped Annie into the car and placed the old box beside her. The new envelope went inside it, but Annie kept the postcard in her hand. As they pulled away from the curb, Nathaniel looked in the rear-view mirror. Mrs. Bell stood on the porch, one hand raised, small and strong beneath the hanging ferns. Martha sat beside him, quiet. After a few blocks, Annie said, "Daddy." "Yes." "Can we find Daniel now?" Nathaniel looked at the road ahead, then at the box reflected behind him. "Yes," he said, "we can." Annie nodded, then looked down at the postcard again. "She made me birthday cake," she whispered. Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Yes," he said, "she did." And for the first time since the journey began, Annie smiled without asking permission from sadness. Daniel Price lived less than 20 minutes from Mrs. Bell's house in a low brick apartment building behind a grocery store and a laundromat with flickering blue neon in the window. It was not the kind of place Nathaniel had imagined for the man he had hated for 5 years. In his mind, Daniel had always existed in the shadow of that black car. Faceless except for the role Nathaniel had given him, the man who took Lena away. Hatred had dressed him well over the years. Hatred had given him confidence, cruelty, victory. Hatred had made him easier to blame. The real Daniel Price, if the address Mrs. Bell gave them was right, lived on the second floor above a parking lot. With cracked white lines and a vending machine humming beside the stairwell, Nathaniel parked near the back. Annie had fallen quiet during the drive, holding the postcard from Lena in both hands as if it were made of glass. Martha sat beside Nathaniel without saying much, but every now and then she looked at him with the expression of a woman who knew the hardest part of truth was not finding it. It was accepting that it had been close enough to reach all along. "Do I come in?" Annie asked. Nathaniel turned in his seat. "I think you and Martha should stay in the car for a few minutes." Her face fell immediately. "But it's about Mommy." "I know." "Then I should hear." He unbuckled his seat belt but did not get out. He had made promises that morning. He had promised not to hide everything from her, but he also knew there were kinds of truth that could bruise a child if handed over too roughly. "I'm not trying to keep her from you," he said. "I just need to speak to Daniel first and make sure this is safe." Annie looked at the apartment building. "Do you think he's bad?" Nathaniel hesitated. 5 years ago, he would have said yes without thinking. That was the problem. "I don't know," he said. "And because I don't know, I need to be careful." Martha reached back and touched Annie's knee. "Your daddy's right this time, baby. Let him knock on this door first." Annie studied Nathaniel for a long moment. "You'll tell me after." "Yes, the real after." He almost smiled despite himself. "The real after." She nodded and hugged Mr. Buttons to her chest. "Okay." Nathaniel took the old box with him. He did not know why. Maybe because it was proof. Maybe because he no longer trusted himself to speak about the past without something solid in his hands. Maybe because Daniel Price had been part of the day the box entered his life, and Nathaniel wanted him to see what had survived. The stairwell smelled of concrete, detergent, and old rain. A television murmured behind one door. Somewhere, a dog barked twice, then gave up. Nathaniel found apartment 2C and stood in front of it longer than necessary. He had built companies by making decisions quickly, but raising his hand to knock on Daniel Price's door required more courage than he wanted to admit. Finally, he knocked. A few seconds passed. Locks turned. The door opened halfway, held by a chain. The man who looked out was not the man Nathaniel remembered. Daniel Price had been in his 30s the last time Nathaniel saw him through rain and fury. Now he looked older than his years with tired eyes, close-cropped hair gone gray at the temples, and a beard he had probably trimmed himself that morning without much concern for symmetry. He wore a faded Braves t-shirt and jeans, and his left hand gripped the edge of the door with the caution of someone who had learned not to trust unexpected visitors. His eyes moved over Nathaniel's suit, his face, the box in his hands. Then Daniel went very still. "Well," he said quietly, "I wondered if this day would come before I died." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Old anger rose by instinct. Not as strong as before, but familiar enough to tempt him. "Daniel Price, you know I am. I need to talk to you about Lena." Daniel's expression changed at her name. Not guilt, not triumph, grief. He closed his eyes for a second, then shut the door enough to remove the chain. When he opened it fully, he stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small and clean. A worn sofa faced a television on a low stand. There were no expensive decorations. No evidence of a man who had gained anything from taking Lena away. On the kitchen counter sat a bottle of blood pressure medication, a stack of mail and a chipped mug. A photograph was taped to the refrigerator, old and curled at the edges. Nathaniel saw Lena in it before Daniel noticed him looking. She was younger, standing with two other women outside what looked like a church picnic, smiling with one hand lifted against the sun. Daniel saw where his eyes had gone. "That was before Atlanta," he said. Nathaniel turned back to him. "You kept her picture. She was family." The word struck Nathaniel wrong. Family. Daniel gave him a tired look. "Sit down, Mr. Whitmore, or stand there hating me. I've had practice with both." Nathaniel remained standing. "Were you in love with her?" Daniel did not flinch. "Yes." Nathaniel's face hardened. Daniel raised a hand. "Not the way you mean. I loved her because her grandmother and mine were sisters. Because when my mother died, Lena's family fed me. Because when I got stupid at 22 and nearly threw my life away, Lena was the one who sat outside the county jail until morning and told me I was better than what I'd done. I loved her like kin, like debt, like you love someone who helped you stay human." Nathaniel had no answer ready for that. Daniel moved to the kitchen and poured water into a glass, not offering one to Nathaniel. "She called me the week before she left. She was scared. I mean scared in a way Lena didn't get. Lena could face down landlords, cops, rich donors, anybody who thought a black woman with no money ought to lower her eyes. But your father," he shook his head. "Your father knew how to make fear look like paperwork." Nathaniel's fingers tightened around the box. "What did he do?" Daniel leaned against the counter. "You really don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't be here." Daniel studied him. "Maybe. Or maybe you know some of it and want me to do the dirty work of saying it." Nathaniel absorbed the blow because again, it was not entirely undeserved. Daniel continued. "Charles Whitmore had lawyers draw up papers questioning Lena's fitness as a mother. Nothing filed yet, just drafted. He showed them to her. Said if she tried to stay, he would bury her in court. Said he'd have experts testify she was unstable. That she was using you. That she had no financial foundation, no proper family structure, no place in the world Annie would inherit. He never said race out loud. Of course, men like that know how to season poison without naming the bottle." Nathaniel felt the room tilt. "He told her I would fight him." Daniel's mouth twisted. "He told her you would be advised to protect your daughter from scandal. He told her love was easy until custody got public. He said if she cared about Annie, she would leave quietly while the baby was too young to remember." Nathaniel looked down at the box in his hands and she believed him. She believed he could do it. That was worse because it was reasonable. Daniel walked to a narrow closet near the hull and pulled a metal tin from the top shelf. It was the kind used for Christmas cookies, red and gold, dented near one corner. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside were papers, old photographs, and a small cassette tape in a plastic case. "She made me keep this," Daniel said. Nathaniel stared at the tape. "What is it?" "Proof. Not enough for court, maybe enough for conscience. If anybody in your family had been using one." Nathaniel looked at him sharply. Daniel did not apologize. "She recorded one of the conversations with your father. Not the worst one," she said. "Just the one she managed to catch." Nathaniel reached for the tape. But Daniel put his hand over it. "Before I give you this, you need to understand something." Nathaniel's voice was low. "Move your hand." "No." The word surprised him. Men rarely said no to Nathaniel Whitmore. That simply. Daniel leaned forward. Lena did not leave because she stopped loving you. She left because she thought staying would destroy Annie's life before it started. I told her to tell you everything. I begged her. She said you were surrounded by your father's people, your father's lawyers, your father's money, your father's version of truth. She said if she came to you and you hesitated even for 1 second, it would kill her. Nathaniel went still. Daniel's voice softened, but it did not become gentle. Did you hesitate much in those days, Mr. Whitmore? The answer was there before Nathaniel could defend himself. Yes, he had hesitated. Not in loving Lena, maybe, but in cutting Charles off, in seeing the danger clearly, in believing that old money could do violence without ever raising its voice. He had thought there would always be time to fix things. People with power often made that mistake. They believed urgency was for people without options. He sat down slowly. Daniel removed his hand from the tape. Nathaniel picked it up. His fingers felt numb. She wanted me to give it to you if you came looking. Daniel said, you didn't. Nathaniel closed his eyes. I thought you took her from me. I know. I hated you. I figured you never came to explain. Daniel laughed once without humor. To the Whitmore estate, past your guards, your father's people, your lawyers. I tried calling twice. Numbers changed. I sent a message through somebody at the church. Never heard back. Then Lena told me to stop. She said, if you wanted to believe the worst of her, maybe that was easier than watching you choose not to fight. Nathaniel flinched. Daniel saw it and looked away as if even he took no pleasure in that one. Where is she? Nathaniel asked. Daniel was quiet. Mrs. Bell said she went to South Carolina. She did. Where? Daniel picked up a folded piece of paper from the tin. Last I knew, a coastal town outside Beaufort. She used the name Lena Bell for a while. Then Lena James. She moved when she felt watched. Is she alive? Daniel did not answer fast enough. Nathaniel's heart dropped. I don't know, Daniel said. I haven't heard from her in over a year. Nathaniel looked toward the window. Toward the parking lot where Annie waited in the car with Lena's bracelet. And a child's belief that truth should lead to repair. She's sick, Daniel added quietly. Nathaniel turned back. What? Her heart. She had trouble after Annie was born. But it got worse. She didn't want you to know that either. Said she wouldn't be pied by people who had already taken enough. Nathaniel stood so abruptly the chair scraped back. Daniel placed the folded paper beside the tape. That's the last address I had. Might still be good, might not. Nathaniel picked it up. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Daniel said, is Annie with you? Nathaniel looked at him in the car. Daniel said, I saw the child through the window when you pulled in. She looks like Lena. Nathaniel nodded. Does she know some? Does she think Lena didn't want her? Nathaniel's throat tightened. She did. Daniel's face went hard with grief. Then undo that. Whatever else you do, undo that first. Nathaniel walked to the door, then stopped. He looked back at the man he had hated for 5 years and saw perhaps for the first time. Not a rival, but another person left holding a piece of Lena's pain. Thank you, he said. Daniel looked away. Don't thank me. Find her. Nathaniel opened the door. Behind him, Daniel added, and Mr. Whitmore. Nathaniel turned. If your father is still telling himself he did this for family, you tell him from me that family is not something you protect by breaking a mother in half. Nathaniel held his gaze, then nodded once. Outside, the late afternoon heat pressed down on the parking lot. Annie sat up straighter when she saw him. Martha opened her door before he reached the car, reading his face the way she always did. Well, she asked. Nathaniel looked at Annie through the window. Her small hand was pressed to the glass, the silver bracelet looped around her fingers. He held up the cassette tape and the folded address. Daniel didn't take her from us, he said, his voice rough. He tried to help her. Annie's eyes moved from his face to the paper in his hand. Do we know where Mommy is? Nathaniel opened the rear door and crouched beside her. We know where she might be. Annie clutched the bracelet. Can we go now? Nathaniel looked at Martha, then back at Annie. Yes, he said, but first, we have to listen to something. Annie's face grew uncertain. Is it scary? Nathaniel thought of the cassette in his hand. Of Charles's voice waiting inside it, of Lena's fear preserved on old tape, of the truth his daughter deserved and the parts she should not yet have to carry. Maybe, he said, but you won't listen alone. Annie reached for his hand. He took it, and together, with the old box open on the seat between them, they sat in a cracked parking lot in Savannah while the past at last prepared to speak in its own voice. They did not play the cassette in Daniel Price's parking lot. Nathaniel held it in his hand for a long minute, looking at the cloudy plastic case, at the little brown reels inside, at the handwritten label that had faded almost to nothing. He knew he could borrow Daniel's old tape player and hear it right there with Annie in the back seat and Martha beside him and the whole ugly truth pressing against the windows. But when he looked at his daughter, at the way she held Lena's bracelet in both hands, as if it were the last thread connecting her to a mother she had only just begun to believe in, he could not do it. Not there. Not in the heat of a cracked parking lot with strangers pushing grocery carts behind them and a dog barking from an upstairs balcony. Not here, he said quietly. Annie looked disappointed and relieved at the same time. Then where? At the hotel, Nathaniel said. Somewhere quiet. Martha nodded once. That's wise. Nathaniel almost laughed. Wise was not a word he would have given himself that day. Too late. Maybe shaken, ashamed, but not wise. Still, he started the car, placed the cassette and Daniel's folded address inside the old box, and pulled out of the parking lot without looking back at Daniel's apartment. Some doors once opened did not need to be watched as they closed. They found a small hotel near the river, not the kind Nathaniel usually chose. No private entrance, no executive floor, no staff trained to disappear before being noticed. Just a clean lobby with framed prints of Savannah squares, a bowl of peppermints on the front desk, and an older man in a cardigan who called Martha ma'am with genuine respect instead of service training. Annie liked the elevator because it had mirrored walls and made 3 Annies appear when she stood in the corner. Their room had 2 beds, a small round table, heavy curtains, and a view of live oaks bending over the street. Martha unpacked Annie's things with quiet efficiency, while Nathaniel set the old box on the table. Annie put Mr. Buttons on one bed, then placed the postcard from Lena beside him, face up, as if the bear needed to see the beach, too. Nathaniel went back down to the front desk and asked if they had a cassette player. The man in the cardigan looked amused. Haven't heard that question in 15 years, he said. But my wife keeps one in the office for her old choir tapes. He returned with a small black player, scuffed at the corners, the kind with big buttons and a handle across the top. Nathaniel thanked him, and the man waved it off. Bring it back when you're done. Those old things hold more than music sometimes. Nathaniel carried it upstairs, feeling as if everyone in Georgia had decided to speak in prophecy. By the time he returned, Annie had changed into her blue sweater, though the room was warm. She sat on the bed with the bracelet around her wrist, holding it in place with her thumb. Martha had made tea in paper cups using the small hotel coffee maker. She handed one to Nathaniel. He did not want it, but took it anyway. Annie, he said, sitting on the edge of the opposite bed. This tape may have grown up things on it. Hard things about Mommy, yes, and Grandpa Charles. He looked at Martha, then back at Annie. Maybe. Annie pulled Mr. Buttons closer. If it's about me, I want to stay. It may not all be for you, but Mommy is my mommy. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. The old habit rose in him. Decide for her, protect her, soften the world before it touched her. But that same instinct, twisted by hurt, had helped keep Lena a ghost in Annie's life. Protection without truth had become another kind of harm. Martha seemed to read the argument on his face. Let her stay for the beginning, she said. If it turns too heavy, we stop. Annie nodded quickly. I'll say if I'm scared. Nathaniel looked at her. Promise. I promise. He inserted the cassette. The click sounded too loud. For a moment, there was only hiss. Old tape static filled the room, thin and ghostly. Annie leaned forward. Martha sat still in the chair by the window, both hands wrapped around her tea. Nathaniel stood beside the table with one finger resting near the stop button. Then Lena's voice came through, not clearly at first, muffled, distant, as if she had placed the recorder inside a purse or beneath a folded cloth. I don't understand why you're doing this, Lena said. Annie went perfectly still. Nathaniel's hand curled against the table. Then Charles Whitmore's voice entered the room, smooth and controlled. The same voice Nathaniel had heard all his life at dinner tables, charity events, board meetings, and family funerals. I am doing what my son is too sentimental to do for himself. Nathaniel's stomach turned. On the tape, Lena said, Annie is his daughter. She is my daughter. You don't get to decide where I belong. Charles gave a quiet sigh. Nathaniel could picture it exactly. His father standing near a window, one hand in his pocket, wearing disappointment like a tailored coat. Miss Carter, you are mistaking biology for stability. The child will have every advantage with Nathaniel. Schools, security, a future. You, on the other hand, bring complication. Martha closed her eyes. Annie looked at Nathaniel. That's Grandpa. He could barely answer. Yes. The tape continued. My daughter needs her mother, Lena said. Her voice shook, but it did not break. Your daughter needs a life you cannot provide. I provide love. Love does not win custody hearings. Nathaniel reached for the stop button, but Martha spoke sharply. No, let it play. He withdrew his hand. Charles's voice grew colder, though never louder. You may force this into court if you wish. I have already spoken to counsel. They will examine your finances, your employment, your associations, your emotional fitness. They will ask why a woman with no husband, no family wealth, and a record of activist disruption believes she can provide a suitable home for a Whitmore child. A Whitmore child, Lena repeated, and there was real anger now. She is not a piece of property with your name stamped on her. She is my granddaughter. She is my baby. The room seemed to close around those words. Annie's lips parted, Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. On the tape, Charles said, "Then act like a mother. Leave before she is old enough to remember the ugliness you are inviting into her life." Lena's breath hitched. "You mean before she is old enough to remember me, Sans?" Then Charles said, "That may be kinder." Nathaniel pressed both hands flat against the table as if that alone could keep him upright. Annie whispered. He told her to leave. Nathaniel turned off the tape. The sudden silence was worse than the sound. Annie looked at the cassette player, then at her father. Why did he say that? Nathaniel sat beside her. For once, he did not reach for an answer quickly. He let the question exist. He let his daughter see that it deserved more than a neat sentence. "Because he was wrong," he said finally. "Because he thought money and a family name mattered more than your mother's love." "But why?" Martha spoke from the chair, voice low and steady. "Because some people are taught to believe certain folks belong in certain places. And when love crosses those lines, they call it trouble instead of calling it courage." Annie looked down at her own skin, then at Nathaniel's hand resting near hers. "Because mommy was black." Nathaniel felt the words like a verdict. Martha did not rescue him. "Yes," Nathaniel said, his voice rough. "That was part of it. Because you're white, yes. And because he didn't like that." Nathaniel swallowed. "Yes." Annie thought about it with the terrible seriousness of a child trying to make adult cruelty fit inside a child's sense of fairness. "That's stupid," she said. A broken laugh escaped Martha before she could stop it. Then she covered her mouth, eyes wet. Nathaniel nodded slowly. "It is." Annie looked at the cassette player again. "Did mommy cry?" "Yes." "Can I hear her again?" Nathaniel hesitated. Annie's chin trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "Not him. Her." He understood then. She was not asking for evidence. She was asking for a voice. He rewound the tape a little. Not all the way. Then pressed play. Static. A shift. Lena breathing. Then her voice again closer to the recorder this time. Maybe after Charles had left. She sounded alone. "Nate," Lena whispered, "if you ever hear this, I need you to know I tried. I tried to stay. I tried to be brave enough for both of us. But I don't know how to fight a whole family with a baby in my arms and no one standing beside me." Nathaniel bent forward, one hand over his mouth. "I love you," Lena continued, and her voice broke on the word love. "I love our daughter. God, I love her. If I leave, it will not be because I stopped. It will be because every door they showed me had Annie hurting on the other side." Annie's tears spilled silently now. "I bought her a bracelet," Lena said on the tape. "A silly little silver thing she can't wear yet. Maybe one day if you give it to her. Tell her I picked the heart because she was mine before she was born. Tell her mama wanted to stay." Nathaniel stopped the tape. No one moved. Annie held up her wrist. The bracelet slid down again. Too large, too early, too late. "She wanted to stay," Annie whispered. Nathaniel gathered her into his arms. She came willingly. Suddenly, small against him. Her face pressed into his shirt. "Yes," he said, and his own tears fell into her hair. "She wanted to stay. Then why didn't you help her?" The question came muffled against his chest, and it destroyed every defense he had left. Martha looked away toward the window. Nathaniel held Annie tighter, but not to silence her. To keep himself from falling apart before he answered, "Because I didn't know enough," he said. "And because I didn't look hard enough. I thought I was the one who had been left. And I let that hurt make me blind." Annie pulled back just enough to look at him. "Are you mad at Grandpa?" "Yes." "Are you mad at Mommy?" He looked at the bracelet, then the tape, then the old box holding more truth than he had allowed his daughter to have. "No," he said, "not the way I was." "Are you mad at yourself? That one took longer." "Yes," he said softly. "Very." Annie touched his cheek with the hand that wore the bracelet. "Don't cry too much." He gave a broken smile. "I'll try, but a little is okay." Martha wiped her eyes with a napkin and muttered, "Lord, this child." Nathaniel kissed Annie's forehead. For several minutes, they sat like that. The three of them in a hotel room in Savannah with an old cassette player on the table and the evening light turning gold around the curtains. Outside, people walked toward dinner. Cars rolled over cobblestone streets. And somewhere nearby, a street musician played a slow tune on a trumpet. Life carried on, indifferent and merciful. When Annie finally grew sleepy, Martha helped her wash her face and change into pajamas. Annie insisted on putting the postcard under her pillow and the bracelet beside it. She asked if the box could stay open on the table. Nathaniel said yes. She fell asleep holding Mr. Buttons, her face still blotchy from tears, but calmer than before. Nathaniel stood near the window long after Martha turned off the bedside lamp. "You heard it now," Martha said quietly. He nodded. "You can't unknow it." "No." "What will you do?" Nathaniel looked at the cassette tape, at Daniel's folded address, at the box Lena had left because she understood something he had not. That truth sometimes needed more than one hiding place to survive. "I'm going to find her," he said. Martha stood beside him, looking out at the moss-covered trees and Charles. Nathaniel's face hardened. not with the old coldness of business, but with something cleaner and more dangerous. I'm going to ask my father what else he stole. Morning came softly over Savannah, but nothing inside Nathaniel felt soft. He woke before sunrise in the chair by the window, still wearing yesterday's shirt with the cassette tape on the table beside him and Lena's voice echoing in a place sleep had not reached. Across the room, Annie was curled under the blanket with Mr. Buttons tucked beneath her chin. The postcard from Lena was under her pillow. The silver bracelet lay beside it, too large for her wrist, catching a pale strip of morning light as though it had been waiting all night to remind him why they had come. Martha was already awake. Of course, she was. She sat at the small desk near the wall, quietly, writing something on hotel stationery with her reading glasses low on her nose. When Nathaniel shifted, she looked up but did not speak right away. Older women who had raised families, through sorrow, knew that silence could be breakfast before food. You slept in that chair, she said at last. I didn't sleep much, I figured. What are you writing? A list, she said. Children need clean socks. Men in emotional crisis forget socks. Despite the weight in his chest, a faint smile crossed his face and disappeared. Thank you. You can thank me by eating something before you go declaring war on your father. Nathaniel looked at Annie. I'm not declaring war. Martha removed her glasses and gave him a look that had probably corrected 3 generations of foolish men. Mr. Nathaniel, when a son says he's going to ask a powerful father what else he stole, that's not a conversation, that's weather. He turned back to the window. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled along the street. A man in a baseball cap walked a small dog beneath the hanging moss. A city woke up around them, unaware that somewhere in one hotel room, an old family story had changed shape overnight. I need to call him, Nathaniel said. Not with Annie in the room. I know, and not before coffee. He glanced at her. I'm serious, Martha said. You face a man like Charles Whitmore, tired and empty. He'll turn your own anger into evidence against you before you know what happened. Nathaniel knew she was right. Charles did not win by shouting. Charles won by arranging the room so that everyone else sounded unreasonable. He had built a life out of polished restraint, private pressure, and public virtue. Even now, after hearing his voice on that tape, Nathaniel could picture him sitting in the old Atlanta study, calm as stone, telling himself that every cruel thing he had done had been necessary. Annie Steele and Bill. Nathaniel turned immediately. She opened her eyes slowly and looked around the room as if remembering where she was, then her hand slipped under the pillow. She found the postcard first, then the bracelet. Only when both were in her hands did she sit up. Did Mommy call? She asked, still half asleep. The question hit Nathaniel before he could prepare for it. No, sweetheart, he said gently. Not yet. Annie nodded, but disappointment moved across her face like a cloud. She looked at the bracelet. Are we still looking? Yes. Today, yes. Martha stood and began gathering clothes from Annie's suitcase. First, we wash faces. Then, breakfast. Then, grown folks handle grown folks. And little girls eat something with protein. I don't like protein. You like bacon. That's different. That is protein wearing a party dress. Annie gave a tiny smile and Nathaniel felt grateful for Martha in a way he could not have explained without embarrassing them both. They ate downstairs in the hotel dining room where a small buffet offered scrambled eggs, bacon, biscuits, oatmeal, and apples that no child seemed interested in. Annie chose cereal, bacon, and half a biscuit. Then asked if Savannah had birthday cakes. Martha told her every city had birthday cakes if you knew the right bakery. That made Annie quiet again, but not in a broken way. More like she was placing another small tile into the picture of Lena she was building inside herself. Nathaniel's phone had been off since the day before. When he powered it on after breakfast, it filled with messages so quickly the screen seemed to panic. His assistant, the chief financial officer, legal counsel, board members, 3 missed calls from his father. The last message from Charles was short. Call me before you make this worse. Nathaniel stared at it until Martha leaned over slightly. He always did like making other people's pain sound inconvenient, she said. Nathaniel put the phone in his pocket. I'm going outside. Martha nodded. We'll be in the lobby. Annie looked up. Are you calling Grandpa? Yes. Her face tightened. Is he going to be mad? Probably. Are you scared? Nathaniel crouched beside her chair. Yesterday he might have said no today. He was tired of building courage out of lies a little. Annie touched the bracelet in her lap. Then be scared together, remember? He smiled sadly. I remember, but I'm not going outside. No, not for this part. She accepted that, then held up the bracelet. Take this. Nathaniel looked at it. It helped me, she said. Maybe it helps you. He closed his hand gently around the bracelet. I'll bring it back. Outside, the air was already warming. Nathaniel walked to a small courtyard beside the hotel where iron tables sat beneath a live oak tree. He stood under the branches, Lena's bracelet in one hand and his phone in the other. For a long moment, he did nothing. Then he called Charles. His father answered on the second ring. Nathaniel. No greeting, No concern, just his name, spoken like a reprimand. Did you threaten Lena Carter? Nathaniel asked. Silence. Not long. Just enough. Then Charles sighed. So this is where we are. Yes, Nathaniel said, this is where we are. I assume you found something. I found the box. Another pause. And I heard the tape. This time, Charles did not answer immediately. Nathaniel looked at the bracelet in his palm. The little silver heart rested against his skin, light as a child's breath. You remember the conversation? Nathaniel asked. I remember many conversations. I was trying to prevent a disaster. A disaster, yes. A young man about to throw away his future, his company, and his family name over a woman who had no understanding of the life she was entering. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Even now, Charles could not say her name without lowering her to a category. Her name is Lena. I know her name. No, Nathaniel said, voice quiet. You knew how to say it. That isn't the same thing. Charles's voice cooled. Be careful. For once, no, Nathaniel. You told her she would lose Annie. I explained reality. You used my daughter as leverage against her mother. I protected your daughter. Nathaniel almost laughed, but there was no humor in him. You took a black woman who had just given birth to your granddaughter and made her believe the only loving thing she could do was disappear. I gave her a choice. You gave her a thread dressed as a choice. Charles's voice hardened. You were not thinking clearly in those days. You were intoxicated by defiance. You wanted to prove you could stand against me. And she was the instrument you chose. She was the woman I loved. She was a liability. The word hung there. Nathaniel lowered the phone slightly, then brought it back to his ear. His hand was shaking, but not from weakness now. My daughter is not a liability, he said, and neither was her mother. Charles was quiet for a moment. Then, in a softer voice, the one he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, he said, you have Annie because of me. Nathaniel stopped breathing. Charles continued, you raised her in safety, in comfort. She has every advantage because I made sure a difficult situation did not become a public custody war. You may hate my methods, but do not pretend you dislike the outcome. Nathaniel looked across the courtyard. A woman in her 60s passed on the sidewalk holding a coffee cup, nodding politely as she went by. Ordinary life. Again, moving past extraordinary cruelty. The outcome, Nathaniel said slowly, is that my daughter grew up asking if her mother left because she didn't want her. For the first time, Charles did not answer. That's what your protection did, Nathaniel said. It put that question in her mouth. You could have told her something better. I didn't know something better because you made sure I didn't. You chose what to believe. That struck because it was partly true. Nathaniel stood very still. Pride wanted him to reject it outright. But the last 24 hours had taken too much from him, to leave him with the comfort of complete innocence. Yes, he said, I did, and I'll answer for that. But you don't get to hide behind my failure to excuse your cruelty. Charles's voice went flat. Come home. We will discuss this privately, before you embarrass yourself and damage the company. I'm going to find Lena. Another silence. When Charles spoke again, something colder had entered his tone. That would be unwise. Why? Because whatever story you have built in your head, she's still left. Do not drag Annie through a fantasy of reunion because you are feeling guilty. Where is she? I have no idea. Nathaniel heard the lie, not because Charles's voice changed, but because it didn't. Yes, you do, he said. I will not be interrogated by my son, and I won't be managed by my father. Charles let out a short breath. If you pursue this publicly, the board will have concerns. Your judgment will be questioned. Your stability, your ability to lead without personal matters, compromising corporate interests. There it was, the machine beginning to move. Nathaniel almost admired how quickly Charles reached for institutional pressure. Almost. You still think I'm afraid of losing the chair? Nathaniel said, you should be. I'm afraid of losing my daughter's trust. Charles scoffed softly. Children recover. No, Nathaniel said. Children remember what adults refuse to heal. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Charles said, you are making the same mistake twice. No, Nathaniel said, closing his hand around the bracelet. The mistake was letting you tell me what love should cost. He ended the call. The silence afterward was enormous. Nathaniel stood beneath the tree for several minutes, phone in one hand, bracelet in the other, feeling the old structure of his life tremble somewhere far beneath him. He had expected anger. He had not expected grief for the father he wished he had and the father he actually had. The difference between them was a kind of death, too. When he returned to the lobby, Annie was sitting with Martha near the window, coloring on a hotel notepad with a blue pen. She looked up immediately. Did he yell? No. Was he nice? Nathaniel sat beside her. No. She absorbed this. Did you give my bracelet back? He opened his palm. She took it carefully, checking the heart charm as if making sure Charles had not somehow changed it through the phone. What did he say? She asked. Martha looked at Nathaniel, letting him decide how much truth the child could hold. Nathaniel chose carefully. He said he thought he was protecting us. Annie frowned. From mommy. Yes. But Mommy loved us. Yes. Then he was wrong. Yes. Nathaniel said he was. Annie returned to her drawing. On the paper were 3 stick figures. A tall one, a small one, and a woman with large curly hair. The woman stood a little apart from the other 2, but Annie was drawing a long line between them, like a road. What are you making? Nathaniel asked. A map, Annie said. So Mommy can find us if we don't find her first. Nathaniel turned his face slightly so she would not see his eyes fill again. Martha did see. She said nothing. She only reached into her purse and handed him a napkin. By noon, the consequences of the phone call had begun. Nathaniel's assistant sent a message marked urgent. Charles had requested an emergency board discussion. Legal counsel wanted to know whether Nathaniel had made contact with any outside parties regarding private family matters. A public relations consultant he did not remember hiring sent a proposed statement about respecting the privacy of all individuals involved. The machine was not just moving now. It was circling. Then came the first article. Martha saw it before Nathaniel did. Her mouth tightened as she read from her phone. What is it? He asked. She hesitated, glancing at Annie, who was now sitting by the window with headphones on, watching a cartoon on Martha's tablet. Nathaniel took the phone. The headline was careful but poisonous. Questions resurface around Whitmore's former relationship and child born outside marriage. The article did not name Lena at first. It called her a former community worker with a complicated personal history. It referred to Annie as the child born from the relationship. It used phrases like private arrangement, abrupt departure, and sources close to the family. Every sentence wore clean gloves while leaving dirt behind. Nathaniel read it once, then again. Martha's voice was low. Charles, yes, fast. He's had years to prepare a version. Annie looked up from the tablet. What happened? Nathaniel put the phone face down. Nothing you need to worry about right now. Annie's eyes narrowed. He caught himself. She had already learned what that meant. He corrected course. Someone wrote unkind things about your mother, he said. Annie took off the headphones. Why? Because people sometimes do that when they're afraid of the truth. Did Grandpa tell them? Nathaniel did not answer fast enough. Annie's face changed. He did, Martha murmured. Lord have mercy. Annie slid off the chair and walked to the old box. She opened it, took out the photograph, and held it against her chest. They don't know her, she said. No, Nathaniel replied. They don't. Then they shouldn't talk. You're right. What are you going to do? Nathaniel looked at the headline again, then at his daughter holding the only photograph she had of herself in her mother's arms. The old Nathaniel would have called lawyers first. PR next. He would have measured exposure, controlled language, protected assets. He would have moved like a businessman defending a brand. But this was not about a brand. It was about a little girl learning piece by piece whether she had been loved. I'm going to stop letting other people tell her story, he said. Martha nodded slowly. Good. Annie looked up. Can we still go find Mommy? Nathaniel picked up Daniel's folded address from the box. A coastal town near Beaufort. Maybe an old lead. Maybe the only one they had. Yes, he said. We leave now. Martha stood already reaching for Annie's sweater. Then we'd better pack before another Whitmore decides to make himself useful. Within 20 minutes, they were back in the Range Rover. The box sat in Annie's lap again. But now the photograph was outside it, tucked safely inside her book about the mouse detective. The cassette tape and postcard were inside the box. The bracelet was on Annie's wrist, held in place by a ribbon Martha had tied gently around it so it would not slip off. Nathaniel started the engine. His phone rang. Charles. He looked at the screen, then silenced it. Annie saw. Aren't you going to answer? No. Why? Because some people only call to make you turn around. She thought about that, then nodded with the solemn approval of someone who understood maps mattered. Nathaniel pulled away from the hotel and turned toward the road that would take them north and east toward South Carolina, toward the last address Daniel had given him, toward Lena, if Grace still had any mercy left. Behind them, Savannah held its moss and secrets. Ahead of them, the highway waited, and somewhere between the two, Charles Whitmore's clean, careful war had begun. The road out of Savannah felt different from the road in. On the way there, Nathaniel had carried questions. Now he carried proof, and proof was heavier. The old box rested in Annie's lap, secured beneath both of her arms, while the ribbon Martha had tied around the silver bracelet kept it from sliding off her wrist. Annie watched the passing trees with the quiet focus of a child trying to stay brave by not asking every question at once. Nathaniel drove with his phone turned face down in the cup holder. It lit up again and again, flashing the name Charles, then the name of Whitmore Group's general counsel, then his assistant, then Charles again. Each time, the screen glowed briefly and went dark. Each time, Nathaniel felt the machine behind his father reaching farther, trying to pull him back into the rules of a world where family pain could be managed by lawyers and reputation consultants. Martha watched the phone light up for the 5th time and clicked her tongue. That man never could stand a room where he wasn't holding the key. Nathaniel kept his eyes on the road. He's calling the board. He already called the board. Now he's calling to enjoy knowing you know he called the board. From the back seat, Annie asked, "What's a board?" "A group of people who help run Daddy's company." Nathaniel said, "Are they mad, too?" "Probably confused. Because of Mommy." Nathaniel glanced at her in the mirror. "Because people like simple stories, and this one isn't simple." Annie looked down at the box. "It's simple to me." Martha turned slightly. "How so, baby?" "Mommy loved me. Grandpa made her leave. Daddy didn't know. Now we're finding her." The words were so plain they seemed to clear the air in the car. Nathaniel swallowed. That may be the truest version anyone has said yet. Annie leaned back, satisfied, but not happy. Children did not need complexity to understand injustice. Adults added complexity when they were trying to survive, having allowed it. They were 20 meters outside Savannah when Nathaniel's phone rang again. This time the caller ID was not Charles. It was Eleanor Price, his executive assistant of 12 years. Eleanor never called repeatedly unless something had caught fire legally or otherwise. Nathaniel answered through the car speaker. "Eleanor." Her voice came tense and clipped. "Mr. Whitmore, I apologize for calling again, but you need to know what's happening. Your father has requested an emergency board session for 4 o'clock. He's claiming concerns about your judgment and possible exposure related to private family matters." Martha muttered, "Private when he hurts people, public when he wants control." Nathaniel did not look away from the road. "What else?" "There's a draft resolution circulating, temporary leave of absence. They're using phrases like reputational instability and fiduciary concern." "Who signed on?" A pause. "Henderson, Blake, possibly Carroll." "Cowards," Martha said. Eleanor heard her and cleared her throat. "Mrs. Green, still here, baby." "Good," Eleanor said, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, I'm glad someone sensible is with him despite everything." Nathaniel almost smiled. "Eleanor, send me everything. The resolution, the article sources if we have them, and any communication from my father's office." "There's more," Eleanor said, his hands tightened on the wheel. "Go ahead." "Mr. Charles Whitmore just issued a statement through a family representative. He says he is deeply concerned that you are being manipulated by individuals seeking financial advantage through a painful chapter of the family's past." Annie sat up straighter. "Is he talking about Mommy?" Nathaniel's yaw said. Eleanor went silent for a second. "Is Annie in the car?" "Yes." "I'm sorry. Send the statement." Nathaniel said, "Sir, with respect, what do you want me to tell the board?" Nathaniel looked at the road ahead. The line between Georgia and South Carolina was getting closer. So was the life he had avoided. So was Lena. If Daniel's address held, but Charles had made one thing clear. He would keep poisoning the story as long as Nathaniel let him speak first. "Tell them I'll be on the call at 4, Nathaniel said. Martha turned to him sharply. Eleanor sounded relieved and worried at once. "You'll join remotely?" "Yes." "What should I prepare?" "Nothing polished. Nothing softened. Just the truth." The car went quiet after he ended the call. Annie hugged the box closer. "Are we turning around?" "No. But you said you have a call. I can take it from the road." "Will Grandpa be there?" "Yes." She looked worried. "Will he say bad things?" "Probably. About Mommy?" "Maybe." Annie looked out the window. For a while, she said nothing. Then she asked, "Can I say something if he does?" Nathaniel's first instinct was no. Fast, protective, absolute. But he caught himself before the word left his mouth. He looked at Martha, who gave him no help at all. She only watched him, waiting to see whether he would protect Annie from truth or teach her how to stand inside it. "We'll see," he said carefully. "But you don't have to defend your mother to grown men who should know better." Annie's small face hardened with an expression that belonged painfully to Lena. Somebody should. They crossed into South Carolina under a sky that had begun to gather clouds. By mid-afternoon, Nathaniel pulled into the parking lot of a quiet roadside inn outside Beaufort. Close enough to Daniel's last address to reach it before evening, but with enough privacy for the board call. The inn had white railings, rocking chairs on the porch, and flower boxes beneath the windows. An elderly man at the desk called Annie, "Young lady," and asked if she liked lemonade. She said yes, but only after asking Nathaniel with her eyes if they had time for kindness. They took a small room near the back overlooking a marsh where tall grass moved under the wind. Martha set Annie up at the small table with crayons and crackers. Nathaniel placed his laptop on the desk and opened the email from Eleanor. The board resolution was exactly what he expected. Careful, bloodless, cowardly. His father's statement was worse. It did not name Lena, but it painted her clearly enough for anyone to understand. Unstable, opportunistic, connected to people now attempting to exploit a wealthy family. It spoke of Annie as a child Nathaniel had newly provided for despite difficult circumstances. Every line was designed to sound protective while erasing Lena all over again. Nathaniel read it once, then he turned the laptop so Martha could read it. She got halfway through and took off her glasses. "I need to pray before I say something UNC Christian." Annie looked up. "What does it say?" Nathaniel hesitated, then pushed the old box toward himself and opened it. He took out the photograph of Lena holding Annie and placed it beside the laptop. "It says things that are not true," he said. "About your mother." Annie came over and looked at the photograph. Her jaw tightened. At 4 o'clock, the board call began. Faces appeared in squares on the screen. Men in offices. One woman in a gray blazer. Charles in his study beneath an oil portrait of Nathaniel's grandfather. His father looked perfectly composed, silver hair combed back, tie straight, expression grave but not emotional. He had always known how to look like the reasonable man in a room full of damage he created. "Nathaniel," Charles said, "thank you for joining." "This is my company," Nathaniel replied. "I don't need thanks for entering the room." Several board members shifted. Charles's mouth tightened. "We are all concerned." "No," Nathaniel said, "you're all nervous. Concern requires care." Henderson cleared his throat. "Nathaniel, this situation is becoming public. We need assurance that personal matters will not interfere with company leadership." Nathaniel looked at the faces, then at the photograph beside his computer. "My personal matter has a name. Her name is Lena Carter." Charles's eyes sharpened. Nathaniel continued, "She is the mother of my daughter. Years ago, she was threatened, pressured, and forced out of my life by my father and by mechanisms connected to this family's power. Today, that same power is being used to smear her again." Charles leaned forward slightly. "That is an outrageous distortion." Nathaniel reached beside the laptop and held up the cassette tape. "I have your voice on tape." Silence fell across the screen. Martha stood behind Nathaniel now. Annie stood beside her, clutching the photograph to her chest. Charles looked at the tape and for the first time, something uncertain crossed his face. "You have no idea what you're handling," Charles said. "I'm beginning to. I protected you. You protected the Whitmore name. I protected your daughter." Annie stepped closer to the laptop before Nathaniel could stop her. "My mommy has a name," she said. The board members froze. Charles went still. Annie's voice shook, but she did not stop. "Her name is Lena, and she loved me." Nathaniel felt the room inside him break open. Charles blinked once. "Annie, this is not a conversation for who?" Annie interrupted, small and trembling and braver than any adult on the screen. "For me, I'm the little girl." No one spoke. Nathaniel reached for her hand. She took it but stayed standing. Charles's face hardened. "Nathaniel, remove the child from this call." "No," Nathaniel said, "you removed her mother. You don't get to remove her voice, too." Martha whispered, "Amen." The woman in the gray blazer lowered her eyes. Henderson looked away. Somewhere in one of the squares, a man's pen stopped moving. Nathaniel turned back to the screen. "I'm taking a leave, but not the one you drafted. Effective immediately. I am stepping back from daily operations for 30 days to address a family truth. This board should be ashamed to see mishandled. Eleanor will receive my formal statement within the hour. Any attempt to defame Lena Carter, intimidate witnesses, or use company resources to bury this matter will be met with legal action from me personally." Charles's voice dropped. "You would burn down your own house." Nathaniel looked at his daughter, then at the box that had waited under his bed for 5 years. "No," he said, "I'm opening the windows." He ended the call. For a moment, the room was completely quiet except for the wind moving through the marsh grass outside. Annie looked up at him, suddenly unsure. "Was I bad?" Nathaniel knelt in front of her. "No," he said, his voice thick. "You were honest." "My knees are shaking." "That happens when people are brave." Martha came over and wrapped one arm around Annie's shoulders. "And sometimes, after being brave, a young lady needs lemonade." Annie nodded. "Seriously, maybe 2 lemonades." Nathaniel laughed, then a broken, grateful sound. He kissed Annie's forehead and stood. His phone rang almost immediately. Charles. Nathaniel looked at the screen, then declined the call. Martha began gathering the box, the tape, the letters, and Annie's sweater. "We going to that address now?" Nathaniel looked out toward the road that led deeper into the low country, toward the last known place Lena Carter had lived, toward whatever remained of the woman his father had tried to erase. "Yes," he said before anyone else decides to speak for her. Annie slid the photograph carefully into the book about the mouse detective, then held the bracelet against her wrist. "Daddy, yes. When we see Mommy, can I tell her I said her name?" Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Yes, baby," he said. "I think that's the first thing she should hear." They left the inn just as the sky began to darken over the marsh. The clouds had gathered low and gray, turning the afternoon light the color of old pewter, and the wind pushed through the tall grass in long, restless waves. Annie stood beside the Range Rover while Martha buckled her into the back seat, still holding the photograph in one hand and the bracelet against her wrist with the other. Nathaniel placed the old box on the seat beside her. "Keep it close." "I will," Annie said. Then after a moment, "Do you think Mommy knows we're coming?" Nathaniel looked toward the road. "I don't know. I hope she does." He closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side. Before he got in, his phone buzzed again. This time it was not Charles. It was Eleanor. He answered. "Sir," Eleanor said, her voice tense. Your father has escalated. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Of course, he has. He's asked legal to review whether company assets were used in connection with your travel. He's also asked security for old visitor logs related to Lena Carter. Nathaniel opened his eyes. Why, I don't know, but there's something else. I found an archived file. It was miscategorized under estate maintenance records. There's a scan of a letter addressed to you from Lena Carter, dated 4 days after she left. Nathaniel went still beside the car. Inside, Martha watched him through the windshield. Say that again, he said. A letter from Lena, Eleanor repeated. It appears to have been received at the Atlanta house and then redirected to Charles Whitmore's private office. There's a note attached from the former house manager, per Mr. Charles Whitmore. Do not deliver. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of Eleanor's breathing on the line. Send it to me, Nathaniel said. I already did, but sir, it's only a scan of the envelope in the first page. The full physical letter may still be in your father's files. Nathaniel looked back toward the room they had just left, as if the road ahead had suddenly split in two. Lena might be somewhere near Beaufort, sick and hidden under another name. But in Atlanta, in his father's possession, there might be one more piece of her voice, one more stolen attempt to reach him. Thank you, Eleanor. There's one more thing. His grip tightened. What? Your father's office requested destruction of certain family correspondence archives this morning. Routine privacy cleanup, they called it. Nathaniel's face went cold. Charles was not just defending himself now. He was destroying the trail. Lock down whatever you can, Nathaniel said. Quietly. Send copies to my personal counsel, not company legal. And Eleanor. Yes, sir. You may be asked to choose sides. I already did, she said. The line went dead. Nathaniel stood there for a moment, phone in hand, the wind lifting the edge of his jacket. Then he opened the email. The scan loaded slowly. First the envelope, his name in Lena's handwriting. Nate Whitmore, the old Atlanta address, a postmark from Savannah, then the first page. Nathaniel's knees nearly failed him. He held the phone in both hands, reading the lines again and again, though each reading only made them more unbearable. I did not leave you. I am being forced away. Please find me. Tell Annie every day that her mother loves her more than life. He had not received it. He had not read it. He had not looked for her. He had spent 5 years believing in betrayal, while a letter begging to be believed sat somewhere in his father's hands. Martha opened her door. Mr. Nathaniel. He turned the phone toward her without speaking. She read the screen. Her face tightened in pain. Then anger. Not loud anger. The old deep kind. The kind that had learned to sit properly in church and still burn. He stole her voice, she said. Nathaniel looked toward the highway. Annie unbuckled herself halfway and leaned forward. What happened? Martha looked at Nathaniel. He knew what she was asking. How much now? He got into the driver's seat, but did not start the engine. Instead, he turned around to face Annie. We found another letter, he said. From Mommy. Yes, where? He took a breath. My father kept it from me. Annie's face changed. The hurt was not dramatic. It was quieter than that, more confused than angry. Why would he do that? Nathaniel had no answer that could make sense to a child because there was no answer that made sense to a decent adult. Because he wanted me to believe what he wanted, he said. Annie looked down at the bracelet. Did Mommy write about me? Yes. What did she say? Nathaniel's voice broke despite his effort.